On March 15, 2011, Martin Sims was wandering down the streets of Carson, California. His clothes were ragged, he was filthy, and gibbering like a madman with a full beard and long, unkempt hair. His body was covered in scars, but he showed no signs of malnutrition. What made Martin's sudden appearance so remarkable? He'd been missing for 3 years. When he was interviewed by police, they asked him where he'd been all this time. They couldn't believe his answer. He'd been trapped in an IKEA since 2008, but this was no ordinary IKEA. This was a dangerous anomaly that would come to be known as SCP-3008. Martin's strange answers in his interview were laughed off by his interviewing officers, who assumed he was either crazy or under the influence of something, but they caught the attention of an SCP Foundation field agent embedded in the precinct. The report was passed up the chain to a local site director who approved a detachment of Foundation field operatives to look into Martin's case. While he was reluctant to lead the Foundation agents back to the offending IKEA, the Foundation can be extremely persuasive. His screams of "Please, I'm begging you, don't take me back, don't make me go back," were noted but ultimately disregarded. When the SCP Foundation had triangulated the position of SCP-3008, which was indeed an active IKEA, the entire retail zone was closed and barricaded under the pretense of a severe black mold infestation. Armed Foundation personnel also arrived on the site shortly after, based on Martin's vague statements that there were creatures of some kind inside. Due to his deteriorating mental health, Martin was unable to provide a great deal of lucid information on the specific traits of SCP-3008. But one phrase he kept repeating was "bigger on the inside." Once researchers were satisfied that Martin had delivered all the pertinent information he was able to, he was administered Foundation amnestics to erase his memory of the last 3 years and return to his family. A cover story was formulated. Martin had been kidnapped and abused for 3 years by a mentally unbalanced stalker in downtown Carson. He'd been able to escape as said stalker took his own life out of guilt, a suicide that the Foundation expertly fabricated to make their cover story airtight. With the loose end of Martin Sims taken care of, the true observation of SCP-3008 could begin. A base set around the perimeter of the mysterious IKEA kept a 24-hour watch on the building, covering all potential entrances and exits. No exploratory missions had yet been approved by the Foundation Ethics Committee, so they first wanted to perform a week of external observation to see if any of the store's anomalous properties extended beyond the confines of the building. After a week of nothing, it appeared they did not. A local site director approved of the use of 20 disposable Class D personnel to explore the interior of SCP-3008. The D-Class operatives would be split into 4 squads of 5 men, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta Squad. Each would be assigned a different quadrant of the store and would deliver information back to the control team on site via a live audio and video link. 3 of the 4 teams upon entering the store reported nothing out of the ordinary. Neither the audio or video they were sending back indicated anything different from a standard IKEA store, from the flat-pack wardrobes to the Swedish meatballs. Team Delta, however, suddenly began experiencing a scrambled audio and video connection. Shortly after, communication with Team Delta dropped off entirely. They disappeared somewhere inside the store and haven't been seen since, with one notable exception. After the disappearance and the extraction of teams, Foundation researchers classified SCP-3008 as Euclid because its anomalous properties were at least confined to the interior of the store, and even then seemingly not the entire interior. The anomalous area within SCP-3008 became known as SCP-3008-1, and containment appeared to be 100% secure. There was no telling how many people had already gone missing in the store over the years, but the disappearances must be stopped. The Foundation maintained constant surveillance around the perimeter of SCP-3008, but it appeared they could prevent any further incidents by simply preventing other civilians from accessing the IKEA store. Martin's ravings about monsters were assumed to just be the product of delirium, until a surviving member of Delta Team suddenly reappeared. The date was November 3, 2011. It was a cold night, a few hours after what would have been closing time if the store were still active, and 7 months after the extraction teams had disappeared somewhere in the confines of SCP-3008. There had been no anomalous activity outside the store since the perimeter was first secured, and the Foundation researchers hadn't expected that to change until the last surviving member of Delta Team came barging out of the store's entrance. Startled field operatives were amazed to see him again, but they were even more amazed to see what was following him out of the store, repeating the same phrase, "The store is now closed, please exit the building." Despite the fact that the entity chasing the Delta Team survivor was wearing the yellow shirt and blue pants of an IKEA store employee, the being definitely was not human. It was around 7 feet tall with no visible face. The entity had grossly extended limbs, with each arm being around 5 or 6 feet long and ending in a huge oversized hand. The whole process was so sudden that the field agents present at the perimeter weren't able to save the Delta Team survivor, as the entity reached forward with his freakishly long arms, grabbed him and twisted his head off like a child with a doll. The field operatives present drew their weapons and peppered the entity with bullets. It would later be classified as SCP-3008-2. The being appeared to collapse and die from the physical trauma, at which point it and the body of the former Delta Team survivor were taken for an autopsy by Foundation researchers. There were no biological abnormalities of the body of the Delta Team survivor, so it did not appear that the anomalous properties of SCP-3008-1 had any effect on the physiology of its occupants. He was not malnourished despite being missing for months, and the contents of his stomach looked to be half-digested food consistent with the menu of a typical IKEA store restaurant. SCP-3008-2, on the other hand, raised a number of perplexing biological questions. The autopsy revealed that the creature's clothes were actually part of its body, like an additional layer of skin. The creature lacked blood or any kind of vascular system. Even stranger, the entity didn't appear to have bones or internal organs, not even a brain or nervous system. It was a being made entirely of skin all the way to its core. How it was able to move, or even live for that matter, remains a mystery. Though when you work for the SCP Foundation, you learn to accept that some things will always remain unexplained. One thing was certain though, Martin Sims was right about his monsters. After the incident with Delta Team, the Foundation deemed that sending manned explorations into the heart of SCP-3008 was too much of a liability and planned a series of drone-based reconnaissance missions into the anomaly. The first of these drones experienced connection issues and failed when attempting to venture into the IKEA's anomalous zone. However, after a lengthy period of trial and error, the Foundation was able to establish a more secure connection with its drones, even when deep into the SCP-3008-1 anomalous zone. It was only then that some of the most extraordinary discoveries were made. SCP-3008-1 seemed to break the laws of spatial reality, as the area of the IKEA's interior was at least an order of magnitude larger than its exterior. Just as Martin Sims had said, it was bigger on the inside, but just how much bigger? The Foundation has yet to find evidence of any physical terminators within the store that might indicate SCP-3008-1 has an endpoint, while an area of at least 10 kilometers squared has been uncovered in SCP-3008-1. It could, in theory, be infinite. Laser rangefinder tests, which are normally very reliable, have only given inconclusive results. Interestingly, the anomalous area doesn't have any clear visual differences from the rest of the IKEA store, except that it extends forever. An individual trapped within the confines of SCP-3008-1 wouldn't even realize they've entered an anomalous zone until they tried to locate an exit and leave, at which point they'd find they were already hopelessly lost. The geography of SCP-3008-1 does at least appear to be consistent, so people trapped within are theoretically able to retrace their steps and escape if they haven't already ventured too deep. According to data collected during the drone reconnaissance missions, SCP-3008-2, of which there appear to be a vast population, would wander the stores aimlessly during the day. They are unresponsive to the drone's presence and did not appear to be aggressive. While the physical descriptions of these creatures could vary slightly, they all follow the same overall trend. Clothes consistent with an IKEA uniform, no face, either seemingly too tall or too short, and limbs that are grossly out of proportion with their bodies. As the Foundation began sending drones deeper into SCP-3008-1, they found another incredible discovery. There was an unknown population of humans trapped inside IKEA's anomalous zone, and these people had used the IKEA furniture around them to create entire settlements and towns within the store. There were several of these towns, all of which seemed to cohabitate peacefully. Even Foundation personnel found this development in their research to be truly extraordinary. Since SCP-3008 was first identified, there have been only 14 civilian escapes. Some had been trapped inside for months, others had been in there for years, some far longer than Martin's 3-year stint. While every one of these escapees has eventually been released back to their home, after a liberal application of amnestics and a proper cover story has been devised, the Foundation interviewed each of them extensively first. According to each of these escapees, the people trapped inside the IKEA have built an entirely new society across the various settlements. Contrary to the Lord of the Flies' expectations of a group of people isolated and afraid, there's immense cooperation between the trapped civilians. The food in the several IKEA restaurants in SCP-3008-1 mysteriously replenishes while nobody's there, so there's no threat of starving, and the automatic turning on and off of the lights forms as a rudimentary kind of day and night cycle. Nighttime, however, is when things get dangerous, as the SCP-3008-2 entities, which are known to the people inside as the staff, become extremely hostile after dark. Aggressive hordes of the staff swarm the settlements at night, repeating, "This door is now closed, please exit the building." The civilians inside are usually able to repel these attacks with minimal casualties, but the constant war of attrition slowly wears down those inside. The bodies of the creatures also need to be removed from the area after each attack, as the presence of corpses or even parts of corpses has been known to heighten the ferocity of the next night's attack. During the day, the staff return to a docile and unresponsive state, though they'll still defend themselves violently if anyone dares to attack. Over the course of the interviews with the 14 escapees, Foundation researchers were able to answer another of their key questions. How had so many people gone missing in the store for so long without being noticed? But the answer they received only raised many more unsettling queries. According to the escapees, there were people inside the settlements that, despite being otherwise of entirely sound mind and standard intelligence, seemed to lack very common knowledge that even a child should know. For example, some of them weren't aware of the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, or stranger still, the existence of the Statue of Liberty. This led the researchers to a frightening conclusion. SCP-3008-1 may not only be a nexus point of multiple IKEA stores in our dimension, it could be connected to IKEAs in every dimension where IKEAs exist. While it only abducts a handful of people from each store over an extended period of time, it suddenly becomes clear how this SCP was able to trap so many people without detection over such a long period of time, which in turn led to an even more terrifying revelation. The SCP Foundation may not have SCP-3008-1 as contained as they thought. It might even be tucked away in an IKEA store somewhere near you, just waiting for you to visit.
Blood in the water, floating bodies covered in bite marks. It's hungry. More meals will arrive soon. The ocean is a beautiful place, filled with majestic dolphins and whales, colorful coral reefs, and every kind of fish you could possibly imagine. It's also a horrifying place. Dark, endless depths filled with sharks, anglerfish, giant squid, and unknown creatures that look like something straight from a nightmare. The ocean definitely isn't the sort of place most people would want to go after dark. But for one particularly adventurous newlywed couple, a nighttime scuba diving excursion seemed like the perfect way to kickstart their life together. Well, Brad, the husband, thought so at least. His new wife Lacey was a bit more reluctant. They had both been scuba diving before, but that was during the day. She loved the ocean when it was sunny and bright, when she could see everything around her and relax with a nice sunset dinner afterward. The idea of diving down into the depths after dark sent shivers down her spine. But in their vows, she and Brad had promised to always take risks together, and she already said no to skydiving, so this was the compromise. This was what they were doing for their first honeymoon activity. Tomorrow, she promised herself, she would find something more relaxing for the two of them to do. Maybe a nice brunch and a trip to the hotel spa. But for now, the couple found themselves standing on a boat side by side, ready to take the figurative and literal plunge together. Brad gave Lacey's hand a comforting squeeze, a silent promise that everything would be okay. It wasn't too dark out yet. The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft, warm glow across the surface of the ocean. Lacey took a deep breath. They wouldn't be going it alone. The dive master would be with them the whole time, she reminded herself. He was an extremely experienced diver. He had already walked them through the necessary hand signals to let him know if they needed to resurface, and handed them their flashlights. They had already sprung for the diving masks equipped with voice communication systems, so they could stay in touch the whole time. Every potential issue had been accounted for. Now, it was time to dive. Lacey, Brad, and the dive master switched their lights on and slipped below the surface of the water. The dive would take them close to a coral reef, which the dive master promised would look extra vibrant, illuminated by their diving lights. As it turned out, he was right. The reef was a sight to behold. The beautiful blue, green, purple, and red pigments so striking that they briefly distracted Lacey from her fear of the ocean at night. She called out to Brad over the voice communication, encouraging him to come take a closer look at this, but he wasn't there. Where did he go? She turned, shining her light this way and that. She called out for him again, and this time he answered. His next words made her stomach drop. "Did you hear that?" No, she hadn't heard anything. What did she hear? Was something wrong with his oxygen tank? Did he hear something happen to the boat up above? When she pressed for an explanation, Brad simply said, "I heard a voice." That was almost enough for Lacey to want to bail on the whole dive together, but she didn't want to be the one who ruined the excursion they had spent so much money on. She spotted Brad and began to swim after him. "There it is again!" he exclaimed. He was still hearing things. Something must be wrong with his oxygen tank, Lacey thought. He's hallucinating from lack of oxygen. She swam closer to him, reaching out to grab his hand and bring him back to the dive master. But just before she reached him, he swam away from her grasp. She was about to call out to him again to demand he turn around and come back or she would divorce him, but she suddenly froze in place as a sound came over her voice communicator. A voice. Not Brad's, not the dive master, not even her own. A woman's voice she had never heard before, whispering to her in a soft, soothing tone, almost like a lullaby. "Lacey," the voice cooed. "Come this way. Come to me. Don't be afraid." That was impossible. There was no one else out there with them. Who could that possibly be? And why did she feel so compelled to do what they said? Somehow she felt a pull, the tug of an invisible thread leading her in the same direction she just saw Brad swimming. She could hear the voice of the dive master, demanding to know where she and Brad were going, telling them to slow down and let him catch up, but she had to follow that whispering voice. She swam along the path that invisible thread was pulling her, the light in her hand illuminating the way. She was swimming away from the reef a bit and swimming closer to what appeared to be a dense kelp forest. There up ahead, she could see Brad amidst the kelp. He was thrashing around, kicking his leg. His foot apparently caught on something. Then, her ears were filled with the sound of his screams. The flashlight slipped out of his hand and it fell through the water. It cast its beam of light on Brad. Lacey could see the full extent of what was causing those blood-curdling screams. The kelp nearest to him wrapped itself around his leg and dragged him slowly down towards the holdfast on the ocean floor. Brad was fighting with everything he had, clawing at the vegetation that pulled him, but it wouldn't budge. Lacey shone her light down towards the holdfast and nearly dropped it in shock. There, she saw a mouth, wide and waiting, filled with sharp teeth. The horrible sight was enough to shake her into action, and she fought her way through the water over to Brad, struggling to unwind the kelp from around his leg. She was just beginning to make some progress when another piece of kelp gripped Brad's other leg, continuing his slow descent toward the gaping mouth below. Lacey was so preoccupied with freeing her husband that she didn't see the strands of kelp creeping up behind her. She wasn't prepared when they grabbed hold of her arms, pulling her down towards another monstrous mouth. She thrashed and fought, but she was unable to free herself. All she and Brad could do was watch, helpless, as they approached those gnashing teeth. But wait, there was still hope. The dive master, he was still here. Lacey called out to him over the voice communicator, begging for help. From the dive master's perspective, it sounded like the couple had lied about their experience level in diving and had gotten themselves tangled up in some kelp, and now they were panicking. With a sigh, he paddled his way in their direction, looking out for the kelp forest. As he approached, he heard a curious sound, a woman's voice, lilting and sweet, a lot like the voice of his wife's in tone. "Where are you? Come closer. I need you. I want to see you. I want to hold you." "Hello? Who is that?" he replied, curious and confused. Lacey and Brad both began screaming even louder, trying to drown out the voice. They begged him not to listen to it, to focus on getting them out of there. They warned him to be careful and not get too close to the kelp while helping them. The dive master scoffed. This couple was ridiculous, but he would check it out on the off chance something really was wrong, and he would try not to get distracted by any mysterious whispers, no matter how seductive they might sound. As the dive master approached the kelp forest, the screams over the communicator went suspiciously silent. He called out for the couple, waiting for a response, and received nothing but silence. Then the whispers started again. "Don't worry. Come find me. I'm waiting." He shook his head as if trying to physically shake the voice off and continue his search. There he spotted two unsettlingly still silhouettes amongst the kelp. He held up his flashlight and saw the water blooming with a thick cloud of unmistakable red. Blood in the water. Lacey and Brad were hanging upside down, bleeding out into the ocean. As he swam closer for a better look, he saw their injuries. Bite marks. At first his instinct was to blame a shark, but there hadn't been a shark in these waters for years. As he turned to examine the area for evidence of a shark attack, he saw a winding green shadow advancing toward him. The kelp ensnared him before he could realize what was happening, and before long the mouths along the ocean floor were feasting once more. Up on the surface, the boat's captain waited for the divers to return, but after a few hours, realized that something must have gone terribly wrong. The next day, by the time the authorities had found the bodies, there was nothing left but bones. The deaths were written off as a horrible accident, possibly a shark attack that was finished off by scavengers. No one knew that this poor couple and their dive master were victims of SCP-5189. SCP-5189 refers to anomalous variations of organisms belonging to the order of Laminarales, or Kelp. Instances of SCP-5189 are physically identical to the non-anomalous versions of their respective kelp species, with one notable difference. Along the base or roots of the organism, there is a mouth-like structure made from organic algae matter, as well as dentin formations resembling the teeth of a tiger shark. When a human reaches within 80 meters of an SCP-5189 instance, they will hear the sound of a pleasant, alluring female voice whispering to them. These whispers vary from instance to instance in terms of voice and content, but are always seemingly intended to entice and beckon the person to approach. Strangely enough, specimens of SCP-5189 do not possess any vocal cords, so it is unknown how they are able to produce these sounds. If a human heeds that siren's call and moves closer to the kelp, the instances of SCP-5189 will move their thrali and blades, grabbing onto the person with a vice-like grip. These instances are strong, seemingly impossibly so for the variety of organisms they appear to be. But no matter how improbable it may seem, once they've gotten hold of their prey, it is very, very difficult to break free. Once a human is in the grasp of SCP-5189, it will begin to slowly, inexorably pull the human toward its mouth and begin to consume them. It is not a quick process, unfortunately, for the humans involved. The organism takes approximately one bite every half hour. There are no organs attached to the kelp's mouths, so their chewed meal drifts out of their mouth and into the water, filling the surrounding waves with floating streaks of red. Surely the victims drown during this process, making the suffering as short-lived as them, right? Wrong. SCP-5189 will hold living bodies above the water as they slowly devour them. Once the blood loss kills them, these newly deceased bodies are pulled below the surface, left hanging from instances of SCP-5189 until they are completely eaten. Greedy in their feeding habits, instances of SCP-5189 will hold on to multiple victims at the same time. They will keep the thallus wrapped around these captured humans, leaving them floating underwater, taking bites out of various bodies until all of them are gone. Sometimes instances of SCP-5189 will grow together, as non-anomalous kelp species do. Once a group of SCP-5189 has accumulated 50 specimens of 5189 within 100 meters of each other, it is an instance of SCP-5189-1. These instances will work together to capture and feed on bodies and are highly dangerous. On January 15, 2021, an offshoot of MTF Gamma-6 Deep Feeders was dispatched to eliminate the first known instance of SCP-5189-1, which had been discovered off the coast of Southern California. The team approached the process of eliminating this instance the same way they had previously eliminated smaller gatherings of the kelp. For the first 2 hours, the process went as expected, and the mobile task force was able to make a small dent in the population there. But then, something changed. The instances of SCP-5189 began to work together to attack and trap the task force. The first member of the task force to be captured was the captain, who was gripped around the waist with a rapidly constricting thallus of SCP-5189. The rest of the team swarmed around him, attempting to break him free, but the thallus squeezed tighter and tighter until it had squeezed the life out of him. Then it began to drag him down toward the nearest mouth. The sight of their captain's blood spilling into the water was enough to shock the rest of the team into action, but it was already too late. Their attempts to free the captain had brought them too close to the rest of the SCP-5189 instances. Task Force members would attempt to avoid the thallus of one of the instances, only for another to block the path of their retreat. One would grab hold of an ankle, while the other grasped a wrist, pulling in opposite directions and making it impossible to wiggle free without severe injury. One by one, the task force members were ensnared. Some of them drowned. Others were dragged down towards the waiting mouths, screams leaving their mouths as bursts of air bubbles as they vanished into a cloud of red. A few of the task force members were able to swim away, but as soon as they stopped for a moment of rest, they were snatched by more instances of SCP-5189. The Kelp had spread further than they had realized, and was able to follow them much further than expected. Mobile Task Force members 8, 13, and 31 were devoured in the chaos. Members 3, 14, 18, 24, and 29 passed away from blood loss within half an hour of the attacks. Members 2, 5, 8, 11, 21, and 22 died quickly. Others were not so lucky, suspended out of the water just enough to stay alive as the Kelp feasted on their teammates, ready to eat them next when it was finished. No members of the task force were left to exterminate the SCP-5189-1 instance ever made it back out of the water. The instance is still there, picked clean skeletal remains of the task force still hanging from the Kelp. To this day, it is uncertain how much SCP-5189 is in the ocean. There could only be a few small patches, or it could be spread out all across the world. Smaller instances of SCP-5189 can be transplanted to the nearest available Aquatic SCP Foundation facility with minimal casualties. However, if the instance is an SCP-5189-1 infestation, this should not be attempted. The area must be blocked off at an area of 80 meters from the nearest SCP-5189 instance and left alone until further notice. No attempts to eliminate it should be made until the Foundation is able to ascertain a safe and effective method of eliminating these instances. No one wants a repeat of Incident 5189-1, or to see any more bodies added to the grim aquatic graveyard there. When an anomaly is first detected by an SCP Foundation field agent, it's up to the Foundation's mobile task forces to tag and bag the impossible entities before they can do any more harm. Sometimes these retrievals are uneventful, other times, not so much. Especially when they're dealing with brutal forces of nature like SCP-096. Also known as the Shy Guy, a creature that, from the very first interaction with the Foundation, had a reputation for being dangerous and needed to be feared. A series of vague sightings and mysterious disappearances up in the frosty mountains of the Yukon first sparked the Foundation's interest. When they were certain that they had an anomaly on their hands, two retrieval teams, Zulu 9A and Zulu 9B, were dispatched to secure and contain the entity. Zulu 9A took the lead in a heavy-duty chopper, equipped with 50 caliber GAU-19 heavy machine guns, and carrying an AT-4 anti-tank launcher. They were prepared for anything, or so they thought, as they established a visual on SCP-096 while 2 clicks away from the target. They couldn't get a clear line of sight on the creature, but it appeared to be stationary, docile, and was making no attempt to flee. Piece of cake, right? Little did they know that SCP-096 was just looking away from them. If it was facing towards them, it'd be a whole different horror story, as Zulu 9A were about to find out. The team landed their helicopter next to the creature and were shocked to see that it was completely naked, in spite of the sub-zero temperatures all around them. The creature was unnaturally thin, as though it had been starved for weeks, with bone-white skin and unnaturally long limbs. The team guessed that the creature's arms must have been at least 1.5 meters long, but its docile nature and insubstantial body mass gave the impression that it wouldn't prove too difficult to contain. That is, until they saw its face. Zulu 9A's captain was the lone survivor of the incident, as he was lucky enough to be looking away when the creature turned towards his team. The rest of the squad ended up staring eye to eye with SCP-096, and from that moment on, wasn't docile anymore. The creature began to whimper, then cry, then sob uncontrollably in a way that sounded eerily human. This sudden change in temperament startled the rest of Zulu 9A, and they opened fire on the creature. Under the hail of gunfire, SCP-096 entered a murderous frenzy and began tearing into the hapless squad of soldiers. While its flesh and organs did seem to take damage as a result of the barrage of 50 caliber rounds from the helicopter-mounted machine guns, its skeletal structure remained intact, and it continued its onslaught, tearing the team limb from limb, even after they'd blown practically all the flesh from the creature. The AT-4 anti-tank launcher proved equally ineffective at stopping SCP-096 while it was in attack mode. And it was only after slaughtering the entire team that it returned to its docile state. Nobody knows exactly what the creature did to Zulu 9A after the gunfire started, but no trace of the team was left behind. Zulu 9B touched down soon after, and with a grave warning from the captain not to look at the creature's face, they were finally able to subdue it. A bag was placed over SCP-096's face, which seemed to soothe it enough to move it to a nearby Foundation facility. Little did they know, they just obtained one of the deadliest SCPs of all time. And while it may have been under lock and key for now, it seemed inevitable that it would get out and cause more violence and chaos. Research and containment procedures for the SCP-096 were put under the command of Dr. Dan, a senior researcher at the site. It was his job to find out exactly what this being was capable of. And the more he tested, the more he realized that they were dealing with something truly terrifying. Disposable D-Class personnel were used to figure out exactly what it was that caused the creature to enter its attack mode. Just as it had during the initial retrieval mission, SCP-096 went berserk when any of the attending personnel saw its face. In this stage, it would enter a period of considerable and unstoppable distress for 1 to 2 minutes, covering its face and wailing loudly. When the period of distress ended, the creature would mercilessly slaughter every D-Class that had seen its face, and just like with Zulu 9A, no trace of their bodies would be left behind. Dr. Den was horrified and intrigued by this phenomenon. The creature killed anyone that saw its face directly, but could the same be said for indirect depictions of the creature's face, such as images and videos? Dr. Dan was desperate to find out. More D-Class personnel were brought in to test this, to frightening results. Dr. Dan found that the creature did indeed still enter attack mode when people saw pictures and videos of SCP-096's face. The creature seemed to have an innate sense of when people were viewing these representations, even when it should have had no conceivable way of knowing. It didn't matter how far away or how many barriers were in place between the viewer and the creature, the attack mode would still activate. And once it did, it seemed as though nothing could stop the creature from hunting down the one who saw its face. With all of this new data, special containment procedures were devised to keep the creature safely under lock and key. Its cell was a 5 meter by 5 meter by 5 meter airtight steel cube, fitted with advanced pressure sensors and laser detectors to ensure that SCP-096 remained in its cell without risking anyone having visual contact with the creature's face. All cameras and video equipment were strictly forbidden, and weekly checks for any cracks or holes in the containment cell were mandatory. Of course, none of this would stop the creature if anyone somehow saw its face. In order to solve that little problem, Dr. Dan would need to continue his research. To find a method of subverting the creature's deadly glance, they needed to know exactly what they were dealing with. But how could they, when even a glance at a photo or video of the being meant certain death? A potential solution was proposed, creating an artistic representation of the creature's face, something that hadn't yet been attempted. But how would they achieve such a feat? Simple. They'd procure a D-Class prisoner with some artistic talent, and they found one who had been a tattoo artist before becoming a Foundation guinea pig. Dr. Dan formulated an ingenious plan for keeping this D-Class alive for long enough to accurately draw an image of SCP-096's face. He would be placed in a bathysphere diving bell several kilometers underwater and tens of kilometers away from the containment cell where the SCP was being held. The D-Class was made to look at a photograph of the creature's face and then replicate that image in a pencil sketch. Dr. Dan first confirmed that the creature's attack mode is only activated by the creature's face, by having the D-Class look at a series of photos of the SCP's body parts, one by one, finally finishing with its face. The D-Class began drawing and even remarked on how creepy the SCP's facial features were, despite not knowing the deadly context. Meanwhile, back in its containment cell, SCP-096 sensed someone viewing its face and entered its inconsolable crying state followed by its attack mode. It broke out of containment easily and began making a beeline for the D-Class, traversing the miles between it and its prey. The D-Class didn't know it, as he locked the finished drawing into a separate, autonomous submersible, but he was already dead. As the drawing made its way up to a researcher on the surface, SCP-096 dived into the water and started swimming down towards the artist. Minutes later, the bathysphere was breached, and the D-Class was torn to shreds. SCP-096 was recaptured without issue by Surface Recovery Team Foxtrot 303A, and further testing on the drawing showed that artistic representations of SCP-096's face were in fact harmless. From this experience, we now know that the creature has a gaunt face with totally white eyes, possibly indicating blindness and a grossly extended jaw. Nevertheless, Dr. Dan was adamant that SCP-096 was too dangerous to be left alive and requested permission from the upper echelons of the Foundation to terminate the creature by any means necessary. However, the doctor's request would fall on deaf ears, until it all started with a seemingly innocent image. While it's now been redacted for your safety, the black speck inside the yellow circle was once a minuscule image of SCP-096, taken unknowingly in the 1990s by a semi-professional mountaineer. One day they were looking at old photographs when his eyes passed over the tiny speck without even noticing that he had seen anything. But SCP-096 noticed and began entering its attack mode. It tore through its steel containment unit like tissue paper, causing the release of a nerve agent that killed a number of attending Foundation staff. The monster then fled the base and began pursuing its prey, with Mobile Task Force Tau-1 in hot pursuit. Dr. Alexei, who was helping to manage the site where the SCP was contained, was in dismay over the situation. Dr. Dan was out of the country at the time, trying to discover more about the creature's origins. However, he did leave the Mobile Task Force with a new secret weapon against the rampaging Shy Guy: Project Scramble. Scramble were state-of-the-art goggles featuring a new technology created by Dr. Dan, which, using artistic renditions of 096's facial features, could detect and scramble the features of SCP-096 into an unrecognizable form, preventing the normally deadly effect of gazing upon its face. In theory, this would allow MTF Tau-1 to engage safely with 096 once its prey had been eliminated and bring it back into containment. But disaster struck on two fronts. First, the prey in question was located in a population center, creating the potential for a huge loss of life. And the second bigger problem was that the scramble technology didn't work, as stray pixels of the creature's face would reach the eyes of the task force before the internal microprocessor had time to scramble them. The mission turned into a death sentence, as SCP-096 slaughtered almost the entire task force, as well as a number of civilians in town, including an infant and its entire family. It was a monumental disaster, made even worse by a final revelation. Dr. Dan and Dr. Alexei had themselves facilitated the entire containment breach and allowed the resulting massacre to happen, with Dr. Dan hoping it would be enough motivation for Foundation Command to greenlight his research into destroying the creature. Anything that would give him the opportunity to kill this thing would be worth the bloodshed. His plan worked, and the SCP Foundation saw it his way, approving his request to neutralize SCP-096. However, success comes at a cost for Dr. Dan. Once he figures out a way to finally kill the creature, though done in his line of duty, he himself will be terminated by the Foundation for his crimes against humanity. But considering how much damage SCP-096 is capable of causing if it ever got to a major population center, or even worse, was ever caught on camera and broadcast to a worldwide audience, the Doctor himself would likely deem his own death a justifiable cost. To this day, the Foundation is researching ways to kill the creature, and they're still looking for their silver bullet. And the pressure is on. They hadn't known about the seemingly innocent picture that sparked the last containment breach, the one taken decades ago, in which the Shy Guy had only occupied 4 tiny pixels. 4 tiny pixels that resulted in multiple innocent lives lost. So be careful where you look, because who knows how many other photos of the creature are lurking out there. Photos with an innocent dot in the background. Your eyes glance over it, not even noticing the little blip, until you hear a distant wailing that seems to be getting closer and closer and closer, and then it's already too late. You edge the poolside, chlorine-stenched air filling your nose, the sound of splashing and lifeguards whistling bouncing off the indoor pool facility walls. The water ripples, family and friends egging you to cannonball in, the pool almost beckoning you to jump with its suggestive waves. Yet there remains an underlying fear, one that brings your hands to your face and causes your teeth to chatter, even as the pool, clear as glass with chlorine, hides no secrets. A monster, some teeth-gnashing megalodon ascending from the depths of extinction. Leviathan curling its barbed tail to strike its prey at any moment, or even some vast, unknowable force, ancient as Earth, hardly comprehensible to human minds, waiting dreaming to breach the surface. No matter what form this gargantuan, invisible monster takes, you know one thing. Once you jump in, you will not return to shore. You take a moment, recompose yourself, and laugh off the fear. Maybe a product of too much research on the bloop, that deep ocean sound continuing to confound scientists as to its cause. Or maybe too much binging infographics videos on sea monsters, krakens and Loch Ness monsters, mysterious globsters cast onto shores throughout America. Whatever the origin, the thought seems ridiculous to you now, and your fears regarding invisible sharks stalking the pool perimeter escape your mind as you hurl yourself into the water. SCP-1128. In the vast archives of a hidden site, stuffed into a drawer amongst uncountable horrors like it, the SCP Foundation holds a description of a vast, unfathomable horror that'll make you more suspicious the next time you pass a pool, lake, or even a bathtub or puddle of water. SCP-1128 is a gigantic aquatic monster lurking in waters unknown, and that's all the Foundation will let anyone not assigned to testing know about it. While the Foundation has never shed away from those Moby Dicks of the deep, including the several thousand-kilometer-long arthropod SCP-169, and has even utilized such predators in the past for their own benefit, like the lengthy beast SCP-3000, SCP-1128 poses a unique challenge. Anyone who knows of its description beyond surface-level details will fall under the anomaly's effect. The representation you see now is merely an artist's interpretation of the basic prompt. The Foundation, of course, had to discover the monster's effects in the first place. The chain of communication becomes foggy, but a tip from an unknown source alerted the Foundation to the monster's existence and details regarding its manifestation. One man who had stumbled upon the entity's full description started developing acute thalassophobia, the fear of large bodies of water. Not bodies in the water, mind you. The man refused to relax on the beach or fly overseas, claiming he could see the monster's dark silhouette lurking underwater, ever scouting for him. This eventually extended to even closed bodies of water, like lakes, ponds, and pools, still insisting that the creature swam under the surface, trailing him wherever he went. His friends dismissed him as crazy, and he too believed he had fallen under some hysteria. He decided to take a nice, warm bath to soothe his mind and ease his troubles. He turned on the faucet and let the tub fill up. He put on his best bathing suit, ready to calm his anxiety once and for all. This had been plaguing his mind for far too long, and he was ready to rid all the negativity surrounding this phobia. Basically, he was sick and tired of being sick and tired over the idea of it all. He mustered up the courage, and with the anticipation to just simply relax, he took his first confident step into the tub. He paused for a moment and breathed a sigh of relief. He picked up his other foot and stepped fully into the bath. Splash! He fell straight down right through the tub. Waves and bubbles blocked his vision. His arms flailed as he sunk deeper into an abyss of water and fear. This wasn't supposed to happen, he thought. Several moments later, while still in a full-on panic, the buoyancy of his body began to slow his sinking. The bubbles from his underwater screams rose above him, and he began to follow their direction, scrambling back up to where he'd come. Just as he made it back to the surface of the tub water, choking and hyperventilating in terror, he swore he could see a distant creature, the very same that stalked him through oceans and pools, staring at him. Shaking, he hoisted himself out of the water and ran out of the house. Hysterical, he ran through the surrounding neighborhood, desperately searching for someone he could relay his experience to. Blinded by fear, he neglected to spot a puddle in the middle of the road he ran on. He raised his foot, arched forward, and landed straight into the seemingly shallow water. Splash! Again, he found himself completely submerged and drowning. After a minute, he did emerge from the puddle, but not in one piece. Knowledgeable of this incident, the Foundation set about expunging any traces of the monster's description from the world, physical and digital. The The description had low distribution according to the results of Foundation web crawlers, but this hardly stopped the Foundation's endeavor. With forum posts deleted, individuals located and amnesticized, and catalogs trawled to ensure the description did not proliferate, the Foundation engaged in what it does best: questionably ethical experiments. First, they had an anonymous D-Class, uninformed of the creature's effect, read the description of the beast. While the pamphlet they gave him confused him somewhat, he didn't feel particularly frightened by the entity, and he confusedly put on the diving suit the Foundation testers provided him. As they connected him to a cable and told him to enter a bathtub, the D-Class did as they instructed him. The D-Class expressed initial confusion at the tub's depth, remarking that it looked so tiny from the outside. As the D-Class continued to descend, he analyzed his surroundings, realizing the nautical reality that enveloped him. He asked how an ocean got stuffed into a bathtub, but the test organizer had no room for miscellaneous talk. He continued to descend until he hit the sandy bottom, seaweed covering the ocean floor. The D-Class looked around. Tropical fish swam in schools, coral covered the seabed, and to his right dropped an immense cliff, a sheer edge. The test organizer advised the D-Class to approach the cliff, and he begrudgingly complied. As he struggled in his diving suit, he fell back and screamed. SCP-1128, the aquatic horror, swam distantly, gracefully even, and paid no attention to the D-Class so fixated upon it. He realized that the creature matched the one he read on the pamphlet, and almost complained about this when he saw a blue whale swimming alongside SCP-1128. Compared to the monster, the whale looked like a guppy. The whale glided in front of SCP-1128's jaws. The monster remained tranquil, stared at its prey, and bit the whale in two with one chaw. Its teeth glistened in the water. The test operator requested the D-Class to pull back, and as the cable began to draw him toward where he came, the D-Class stared at the creature, swallowing the chunks of whale whole. The D-Class's eyes remained fixated on the creature, partially in fright, partially in awe. He wondered how ocean trawlers hadn't discovered such a giant beast yet, with the world effectively under 100% surveillance, something the D-Class knew far too well as a convict. Yet the D-Class recognized, and if not comprehended, partially understood the ocean's vastness and mystery. The dark depths reveal no inkling as to their contents, and a creature like a giant squid or the coelacanth can remain in hiding for centuries, if not millennia. It held him in wondrous thought to consider the vastness of the depths. When SCP-1128 stopped and stared at the D-Class, this feeling of wonder was quickly replaced with fear. As the creature approached, the D-Class pleaded with the test operators for help. As the test operators accelerated the rate of the cable returning, the D-Class took short, shallow breaths, filling his body with dangerous nitrogen as he ascended, further impairing his judgment. He had devolved into gibberish and screaming when face to face, the monster consumed its prey. The cable went slack, and the test operator pulled up only a broken wire, snapped, the water turning a cloudy red. The test operator knew that the unprotected D-Class had no chance at survival against the monster, but he could potentially arm and shield them. He had another similarly ignorant D-Class once again dress in a scuba suit and enter the tub. However, the test operator placed the D-Class within a shark cage, a la the movie Jaws, and lowered the cage in with another cable and winch system. While unsure how this would fare with SCP-1128, the test operator remained hopeful that the D-Class could survive and recount his story. Unfortunately, as the cage lowered into the tub, the test operator received no response from the D-Class until the line spontaneously tightened, snapped, and loosened. Hoping to find the D-Class's remains, the test operator only found shredded pieces of metal, torn and twisted like taffy. The test operator decided that he could utilize the Foundation's arsenal to his advantage and used an anomalously toughened shark cage in his testing, perhaps using an anomaly like the clockwork machine SCP-914. He gained approval from his higher-ups to undergo this procedure, and after some testing, behind a shining, strong as titanium shark cage, which he placed another D-Class within. Hoping for a success with the monster, however, proved unsatisfactory, as the same thing happened as the previous test, only without any sort of metallic remains. While bitter that the monster had won again, he wondered where the cage had landed. Meanwhile, Foundation forces labored tirelessly to find SCP-1128's location, hoping to avoid any civilian contact with the creature. Luckily, a GPS signal established itself upon the most recent D-Class's test, with the tracking device on the D-Class signifying the monster's general location. The Foundation had redacted the location of the monster, perhaps in a vain attempt to hide a very near threat from potential readers. The Foundation set up a team of only the most talented boaters in its forces, Mobile Containment Force Kappa-12 Sea Devils. Upon arriving at the location, the Sea Devils discovered the previously enhanced shark cage, completely undamaged. However, closer inspection revealed traces of human DNA on the bars, though the Foundation could not confirm whether the DNA belonged to the previously sent D-Class. The test operator, while glad his shark cage survived the monster's attack, still found himself dissatisfied with the overall results of the test. He knew he needed to quell this creature's impact before a large population viewed it or knew of it, but the horrible beast had evaded all attempts at peaceful interaction. Perhaps with a madness not unlike Captain Ahab yearning for the death of his white whale, the test operator armed a D-Class with a specialized weapon designed to deal with aquatic threats promptly. This weapon, potentially another of the Foundation's precious arsenal, could potentially harm, if not kill, the creature. While he knew the Foundation's mission statement forbade unnecessary destruction, the test operator felt it may turn necessary if matters turn any worse. Thus, he sent his armed D-Class through the tub once more, ready to engage the beast in combat. The attempt, as one may expect, did not last long. The D-Class, upon spotting the creature, aimed his weapon at the monster and attacked it, but rather than drive the creature away, it only turned intently upon the D-Class, as if it desired a fight. The D-Class barely managed to scrape SCP-1128 before the creature devoured the D-Class, leaving the test operator once again empty-handed. Defeated and without any more resources to deal with the beast, the test operator ceased his attempts at besting the creature and followed the Foundation's more cautious approach, expunging any publicly found descriptions of SCP-1128 as needed and diverting any vessels away from the anomaly's exclusion zone, as maintained by the Sea Devils. While the creature had proven treacherous in unexpected situations prior, engulfing the man who first heard the creature's description in a rain puddle, researchers could hardly expect what would transpire. A D-Class, afflicted with the monster's effect and observed for testing, avoided all bodies of water as required. Eventually, however, the D-Class needed to interact with some kind of water, drinking water. In a choice between a little water exposure or certain death, the D-Class felt inclined to choose the former. He filled his cup with water and, for fun, placed his finger into the cup, dropping it into the water. SCP-1128, unseen from the outside, violently pulled the D-Class through the cup into its watery domain. The D-Class had not a chance to scream. This alarmed containment staff, now cognizant that even the tiniest specks of water could transport an afflicted person into SCP-1128's ocean territory. This proved particularly strenuous when a new report of a potential SCP-1128 manifestation arose. An old woman, isolated with her cats and knitting supplies, found an article online with a description of the monster. Frightened and disgusted by what she read, she closed the article and continued on with her monotonous life. Such a life would take a turn for the worse, however, when she too developed that all-encompassing water-based fear. Her apartment overlooked an outdoor pool, and one day looking outside, she swore she could see that same dark silhouette as the man did, lurking in the water among kids and parents playing. She swiftly closed the window curtains and taped the seams shut, allowing no light to peek through. Eventually, this paranoia affected her hygiene, neglecting showers and baths for fear of the creature's wrath. She swore she could see the silhouette in any individual droplet of water. Her skin began to flake as she avoided water as much as humanly possible, cracks developing on her arms, legs, and face, inflaming into rashes and itches. Her scratching further increased the flaking. She even eliminated water from her diet, sealing the faucets with duct tape and consuming exclusively orange juice. She threw out her cat's water bowls, dehydrating them. They pleaded with her as she continued to devolve, avoiding any contact with the outside world, even as it attempted to contact her. Eventually, a concerned neighbor contacted the local police concerning the situation, and the case caught the Foundation's radar, recognizing the symptoms of a potential SCP-1128 infection. A mobile task force disguised themselves as civilians to enter the apartment building and potentially interfere with the woman's condition. They entered the complex, climbing up the stairs with barraging equipment for forced entry, as would prove necessary to use to enter the woman's apartment. She had nailed the door shut with wood and sealed the cracks along the sides with plaster in an attempt to keep out any water vapor. She had similarly blocked the window with wood planks. A horrid miasma of dead skin and citrus filled the apartment, the old woman soaking it in, ever avoiding the dreaded monster. The Foundation task force attempted peaceful entry, knocking on the door and asking if anyone lived in the apartment. The woman couldn't speak if she wanted to. Her throat had dried to near silence, save a croak. Suddenly, the task force and the woman heard a rumbling noise outside. Thunder, rain. The woman panicked and yelped, "Don't come in here," in a froggy voice. The task force eventually decided they needed to use their equipment and entered via barrage. The door collapsed and an immediate dense air clogged the task force's sight, blinding and choking them. The woman shrieked and backed against the window inadvertently. The task force insisted they were here to help the woman, but she simply heaved heavily, saying something unintelligible in that dry, cracking voice. The rain began pounding on the window, patter, 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 as the task force attempted to gain hold of the woman. She resisted their movements, moving around the room while the task force intentionally avoided violent confrontation. The rain grew in its intensity as the woman continued running around her apartment, tripping over her starved cats. Eventually, she fell back onto the window, at which the boards blocking it fell onto the floor, exposing the pouring rain fully. She screamed as she saw the silhouette of the monster staring at her in every individual raindrop. One drop landed on her skin, and she violently vanished, pulled into a minuscule speck of water. The task force collapsed from exhaustion, perhaps dreading their inevitable amnestic treatment following exposure with an SCP-1128 afflictee. Yet they couldn't help but wonder what the old woman saw in a single speck of water that could cause that degree of fear and paranoia. The kind of fear only caused by entire oceans condensed into a single droplet. Besides the monster, what else did she see in those multitude of droplets? The fish that populated the sea, the whale carcasses left behind by SCP-1128, the sea devils viewed from below, drifting on the water unsuspecting. Just as one may view a grain of sand and see the Sahara, she too saw that raindrop and viewed an ocean entire, along with whatever malevolent creatures inhabit it. One may have more sympathy for the child, reluctant to jump into the pool water, knowing not necessarily that something inhabits that body of water, but that the body belongs to a cycle much larger than itself, larger than any sea or ocean, and the only thing that can traverse that cycle is a monster, a creature like SCP-1128. The task force went back to their local site to report what happened during the incident. Like so many incidents the Foundation deals with, the sum total of those that risk their lives for the greater good is a couple memory-erasing syringes and another update to documentation. A description of SCP-1128 remains in a stuffy locker, lurking in wait among other horrifying stories in the SCP database's Sea of Terror. Just like that test operator that attempted to best the monster, could the Foundation's attempts ever surmount the possibility of another person being afflicted? Could they conquer the sea? In a member of that task force's dreams, they perceive a dark blue ocean and the distant black shadow that resides within. And from this ocean, they can view the bathtubs, sinks, pools, puddles, cups of water, and rain droplets of the world, seen from below. Although they know not what SCP-1128 looks like, they too experience the fear it summons among those that do, the paranoia, the fear. Although it may not manifest directly in people's lives, it can always be observed stalking, waiting, lurking under a murky surface, watching with hidden eyes.
It's 3 a.m. and the facility is quiet. Office workers and administrators roam the halls. Security officers stand at their posts, clad in advanced tactical armor and carrying standard-issue M4 carbines. 3 Foundation employees sit at flickering monitors watching a live feed of footage from the containment cell of the infamous SCP-106, or as it's referred to by all staff, the Old Man. No Foundation personnel are permitted to travel within 60 feet of the cell for security reasons, and nobody is permitted to physically interact with the anomaly without the approval of 2/3 of O5 Command. The observer's eyes itch and sting from hours of unending blue light exposure, but they can't look away. The Old Man is crafty. He might have the insatiable bloodlust of a hungry great white shark, but he's not mindless. He's a calculating predator, more sadistic than the worst human serial killer, and he's always searching for the next opportunity. According to the Foundation records, he's been active since at least World War II, and it's estimated that he has hundreds if not thousands of victims to his name, and many of those made simple but extremely foolish mistakes of underestimating him. After all, it only takes a few seconds of inattentiveness and the briefest moment of distraction to give him the window he needs. To do what, you ask? Oh, don't worry, you'll find out, just like they did. The Old Man has his nickname for a reason. Most of the time, he really does look exactly like that, an old man, or more specifically an old man's decaying corpse, his body covered in rotten, dark, grayish-black flesh that looks like putrid meat. Though the creature has been observed being able to change shape, the rot seems to run too deep for the Old Man to ever hide it. Foundation employees that have observed SCP-106 for extended periods of time have reported seeing it assume the form of grinning, decayed children and women whose rotted flesh barely hangs on their creaking bones. Just seeing the images through a video feed is enough to cause a lifetime of insomnia and other sleeping issues. Still, they have a job to do and the cameras remain fixed on the Old Man. He's been completely motionless for 3 months, just sitting there like a Buddhist monk in deep meditation. A novice might see this period of inactivity as a cause for celebration, but those with experience know that this is merely the calm before the storm. SCP-106 can remain in a dormant state for months at a time. Described by the Foundation scientists as a lulling state, it's believed that the Old Man is simply waiting for its captors to get soft, make a mistake, or simply have a momentary lapse in concentration, which is all it needs to make its move. It had happened so many times before, and it was about to happen again. One of the observers must have felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety as he saw the creature ever so slightly twitch. Just a tiny quiver in the shoulder muscles, but that was enough to tell the observer that their day had just taken a terrifying turn. He grabbed the emergency phone fixed to his desk and practically screamed into the receiver that 106 is moving, that they need a tactical team stat. But it was already too late. He and the other 2 observers stared into the monitors with their mouths agape as a gooey, rust-like substance began to pool around the creature on the floor of its cell. Slowly, the creature craned its withered neck around. Its face was fixed into a broad, yellow-toothed, lipless grin. Its eyes had the kind of dull, flat malice of an underwater predator. It looked directly into the camera, directly at them, and smiled. The observers knew this was bad. Really, really bad. With what they could have sworn was a little nod, the Old Man began sinking into the rusty puddle it made on the ground beneath it, until it had disappeared entirely. SCP-106 is capable of phasing through any solid surface with ease, making it one of the hardest entities to reliably contain, and earning it a spot on the dreaded Keter class, reserved for the anomalies that are complete nightmares to keep locked up. Through the years of costly research and deadly trial and error, the Foundation would later devise ways of at least slowing the creature down. It's shown to have an aversion to lead, highly complex or random physical structures, and intense bright light. None of these cause harm to the creature, as far as we know, literally nothing can, but they'll at least buy you some precious extra seconds with which to at least try and escape. Seconds the 3 observers didn't have. One of them grabbed an emergency line again and barked into it that they had lost visual on the anomaly. Just then, the observers heard a faint, crackling sound behind them and the hissing of a chemical burn. They turned in horror to see a huge rusty burn mark expanding across the wall, right next to the door, which was their only escape route. They backed as far away from the door as they could as a rotten hand began reaching out of the mass of corrosive black sludge, followed by the grinning face of SCP-106, ready to have some fun. Meanwhile, 2 heavily armed security officers, Agents Goodwin and Resnick, came charging down the corridor toward the observation rooms. It became a bleak slogan during SCP-106 escape attempts that all you need to do is follow the screams, and that motto was proven true that night. because awful things were happening to the observation personnel. They were certainly screaming about it. Of course, even with the top-of-the-line firearms, there was little they could do to harm the rampaging old man. He seemed immune to all forms of physical damage. All they could hope to do was keep the thing distracted until the scientists and containment specialists finished the preparations to lure him back into his containment cell. Goodwin surged forward while Resnick covered his six. Vigilance was key, as unlike a standard human combatant, SCP-106 could attack from literally any angle, including above or below. Physical obstacles were irrelevant to him, and no cover was safe. The hardened security officers could see the burn mark on the wall of the observation room as they approached. SCP-106 was perpetually coated in a thick black mucus with powerful corrosive properties that left any surfaces it touched permanently marred. Foundation scientists speculated that this mucus served as a kind of pre-digestive substance that tenderizes meat and bone alike, but to what purpose this serves is a mystery, as the old man has never been observed eating. It's postulated that the only purpose is causing additional pain. Goodwin and Resnick knew to treat this hissing sludge as a potential threat, as the corrosive properties would remain active for as much as 6 hours before finally fizzling out. The two officers shared a quiet nod before Goodwin breached the observation room door with a hard kick. The two of them surged inside, guns at the ready. In their time working at the Foundation, they'd seen some truly horrific sights. From the mutilation of D-Class personnel, typically death row prison inmates brought in for use as SCP guinea pigs, to the violence and mayhem of a containment breach. But there was nothing in their past that would ever make the horrifying sight they saw in the observation room that night feel normal. All three observers were dead. Almost nothing remained of two of them, and the third, while still intact, no longer looked human. He looked like he'd somehow been dead 100 years in the brief period that the old man had been free. His skin was gray and completely dried out, and his mouth was locked into a perpetual scream. It was a massacre, but there was no sign of the old man. Goodwin grabbed his radio and whispered, "This is Goodwin in Observation Room 6, requesting immediate backup. We have no idea where this thing," but his sentence was cut off by a sudden scream from Agent Resnick. SCP Foundation security officers are as tough as nails, the best of the best, you might say, recruited from the top military organizations in the world. So hearing one of them scream in fright is a rare, if not impossible, occurrence. But even they were forced to yell out in fear when they looked up to see the old man standing on the ceiling, grinning down at them. Resnick raised his M4 and shot a 3-round burst at center mass. SCP-106 didn't care. Even under sustained gunfire from the two security officers, it didn't flinch. The old man simply reached down and snatched Agent Resnick from the ground like it was picking an apple from a tree. The old man held Resnick in one hand and pounded its other rotten fist into the agent's body, breaking all of his bones. Resnick screamed for his partner to help him, but there was no time. Before Goodwin could do anything, SCP-106 began receding back into another slimy burn mark on the wall. Only this time, he was taking his screaming victim with him. Agent Resnick gave one more horrified scream before he was pulled backward into the inky darkness, leaving the room silent except for the burning hiss of the corrosive goo left behind. You might think this would be the end of it, but no. For poor Agent Resnick, the worst was yet to come. He was being dragged into what the SCP Foundation scientists refer to as the Old Man's Pocket Dimension, a miniature layer of reality within our own where the malicious SCP is essentially a cruel, all-powerful god. According to witness reports extracted from victims who were taken to this little nightmare realm, the dimension resembles a series of twisting, endless corridors where the old man stalks and tortures his captured victims to the breaking point, manipulating space and time to his own sadistic ends. On rare occasions, the SCP will even release its victims just for the joy of hunting, capturing, and torturing them all over again. While Agent Resnick was learning the true meaning of terror, containment specialists were mobilizing in its cell, preparing the one known, tried and true method of luring the old man back, tempting it with the prospect of causing even more suffering. In order to do this, Foundation personnel take one of the aforementioned Class D personnel and begin inducing extreme pain by breaking a major bone or slicing a tendon every 20 minutes. The victim's agonizing screams are then played over the facility's intercom, acting as bait for the pain-loving old man. The screams echo through the facility's otherwise silent halls as the mutilated corpse of Agent Resnick falls from a new scorch mark on the ceiling. The old man can hear the sounds of suffering ringing out through the air around him, and he can barely contain his excitement over the prospect of a new plaything. The snapped femurs, the torn Achilles tendons, it was all too good to miss. Having had its twisted fun with the security officers and observers, SCP-106 wandered back to its containment cell, where a new screaming victim awaited. The other security officers, containment specialists, and scientists evacuated the area, leaving the old man alone with his prey. While the unfortunate Class D was left to his fate, the rest of the staff commenced cleanup procedures, which mainly involve wiping the brown and black mucus from the walls. It would probably be at least another month before anything like this happened again, and new personnel would be transferred over to the facility to replace the fallen. All in all, just another night at the SCP Foundation.
Take a brief moment to think back to your younger years, spending long, tiresome hours trapped in a classroom, waiting to hear the noise of that final bell of the day. That sound meant freedom, the end of another grueling 6 hours at your desk, and the chance to get back to the warm sanctuary of home. If you were lucky, you might not have had to go far to get back to the safety and security of being in your parents' house. Living close enough to the school would mean you could easily walk home when the day was through. But your classmates? Well, they weren't all as lucky. Some of them had miles to travel, all the way across town even. Fortunately though, the school bus would always be waiting outside at the end of each day, ready to take a gaggle of rowdy kids back home. And if you were one of those kids that had to take the bus, you'll know that the trip home after school was hardly a calm drive. Paper planes and spitballs firing from all directions, wads of chewing gum stuck to the undersides of seats, other kids all around you screaming and yelling at the top of their lungs. Still, it could be worse, right? No, trust us, it could be much, much worse than you can ever imagine. What if one day, the bus that picked you up from school wasn't a bus at all? What if instead, it was SCP-2086? Picture this. One day you get put in detention at school. Maybe you were disrupting a class or were caught spraying graffiti on the outside wall of the gym. Whatever the reason, we're sure you'll think it is unfair that you got held back after school, after everyone else had already gone home. But you do your time until finally you're told you can leave. Problem is, your house is on the other side of town, and you've already missed the bus. You make your way off the campus, down the nearest street. Maybe there's a city bus you can catch that'll get you back home. As you stroll away from your school, you realize that the nearest bus stop, the first one on the route home, seems to be further away than you remember it being. Must be just the exhaustion of a long day getting the better of you, playing tricks on your mind. It's not like someone could move the bus stop, right? Finally reaching the stop, you notice lights coming down the street after a few moments of waiting quietly. A late bus, just like you hoped for. It pulls up to the next stop, the doors folding open to allow you on board. It's totally empty, save for the driver, but straight away you notice there's something odd about him. He seems drained of color. His movements are weird, more like a puppet on strings than an actual living, breathing human being. Now that you think about it, if it wasn't for the fact he was clearly moving, driving the bus, you might assume that he was a corpse. Then again, maybe he just had a long day too. Taking a seat, you try not to think about it and stare out of the window in boredom. You watch as the route takes you past stop after stop, all of them empty just like the bus itself. But then something unexpected happens. You've ridden the bus to and from school so many times before that you can't help but notice when, for some reason, it takes a wrong turn. Looking out the window, you know you aren't mistaken. The driver has changed direction. Instead of heading towards the nearest stop to home, he's taken the bus towards the furthest edge of town. Desperately, you try yelling at him, asking why he's taken the wrong turn, but the driver stays still, as if he can't even hear what you're saying. That's when you notice the smell. You didn't catch it before, but now it's all around you, filling the air inside the bus. It's almost like the scent of disinfectant. The bus now smells the same way a hospital does. But that's not all. The more you breathe it in, the more you feel yourself starting to get woozy, arms and legs getting heavier. Everything around you feels as if it's spinning uncontrollably. Out of the windows, you can just about make out the sight of a junkyard, blurring in and out of focus. It's meant to be abandoned, and yet you're sure you can see movement. Massive, indeterminate shapes shifting around in the dark. Finally, your vision goes dark and you fall unconscious onto the floor of the bus. Only, you were never on the bus to begin with. No. Although you didn't know it, you were prey to something that just looked like a bus. SCP-2086. And now that it's caught you,
you'll never see the light of day again. Now, SCP-2086 doesn't just refer to a single creature, not by a long shot. It is the designation given to an entire species of arthropods. Think lobsters, crabs, and spiders, or insects like centipedes and millipedes, only much bigger. To the untrained eye, and depending on when you look, an instance of SCP-2086 will normally look like any ordinary public transport vehicle, of any make and model, or belonging to any company or transit authority. Usually, though, they look like regular old buses, at least while they're out foraging for food. When born, an SCP-2086 specimen will grow to full juvenile size within a week, usually weighing 200 kilograms or less. Full matured adult instances, however, can weigh approximately 17,000 kilograms. The adults are the ones that go out foraging, leaving the nest to collect food to then bring back to the juvenile SCP-2086s. And by food, we of course mean humans. While out on the roads, matured SCP-2086 creatures are practically identical to the auto vehicles that form their bodies. But the materials that this disguise is made from, the steel, plastic, wood, and glass, they're all actually comprised of specialized chitin, the kind of outer shell you'd find on most arthropods. But underneath that outer shell, that's where you'll find the real horror. Within the main chamber, beneath the flooring of the bus's long inner portion, is stored the pulsing, beating heart of an SCP-2086 specimen. And we don't mean that in a metaphorical sense. If you were to lift up the floorboards of one of these bus-like creatures, you'd see its heart, along with other vital organs like the creature's brain and stomach. What's more, the figure in the front seat that you thought was a living, breathing bus driver actually isn't living or breathing, not anymore. Preserved in a shell-like substance that the creature is able to produce, the driver is actually a human corpse, acting as a decoy for SCP-2086s. From within the bus body, fibrous appendages reach up into the corpse, almost like incredibly thin hairs. The creature can then use the cadaver essentially as a puppet with a dead person's body. That's how an SCP-2086 is able to move its driver around, making it appear more lifelike so it can lure its prey aboard. Think of it like the bioluminescent light that an anglerfish uses to tempt unsuspecting fish into their jaws. Same principle, but with a dramatically different result when it comes to SCP-2086. But if you thought bus creatures with internal organs under the floor and dead meat puppets in the driver's seat weren't creepy enough, there's still much more to SCP-2086s than meets the eye. For example, when they aren't out foraging, the adult creatures can unravel the roof of their bus-shaped outer shell. Underneath is a pair of wings, large enough and strong enough to carry their entire 7,000 kilos of weight off the ground and up into the air. As for eyes, the headlights at the front are, in actual fact, bioluminescent optical organs, allowing the creatures to see their prey even in the dark. Still not horrifying enough? Well, would knowing about their legs help? The wheels underneath an SCP-2086 specimen are also capable of unraveling, forming long gray or black legs like those of a spider. Yes, these are bus creatures with wings and multi-jointed legs. These legs aren't just big, clumsy appendages either. Compared with other arthropods, SCP-2086s are able to use their limbs to perform surprisingly intricate actions and finer levels of manipulations. For instance, a number of specimens have been observed in the wild by the SCP Foundation building shelters out of any materials that they can find near their nesting ground. And where do they normally nest? Wherever there's plenty of scrap metal and hardly any people to notice them. Junkyards are the preferred habitats of SCP-2086s and where they will normally establish their colonies. While the juveniles remain within the confines of the colony, adult SCP-2086 specimens will leave to collect humans. Although on occasion, the younger specimens have been known to travel out from their nest and rearrange or relocate signposts for bus stops. They then place them in a route that leads them back towards their nesting ground. It's something worth remembering if your nearest bus stop ever seems to be a little further away from the school than usual. Afterward, the older specimens will travel along the route laid out by the juvenile SCP-2086s, picking up any human passengers that they find waiting at the relocated bus stops. They have to choose their moments wisely, with people boarding and disembarking from the bus usually every few stops. Once an SCP-2086 has as many humans on board as it can carry, with the certainty it won't lose any at the upcoming stop, It secretes a substance similar to chloroform. This fills the inner chamber of the bus, causing that noxious smell, like hospital disinfectant. The chloroform-like substance incapacitates all the passengers on board, rendering them unconscious and readying them to be taken back to the local SCP-2086 colony. Once the adult SCP-2086 has arrived at the junkyard, the juveniles will descend on it. Given their much smaller size, they will climb inside the mature specimen and forcibly remove each and every human passenger it is carrying within. Then comes the truly nasty part: feeding time. Each juvenile SCP-2086 will force their captive human through an orifice that is located under the front hood of their vehicle's shell. This sphincter, a circular formation of muscle that can expand and contract to perform a bodily function, is connected to where the steering wheel is found on an adult SCP-2086. The younger creatures will push their human prey through the sphincter, consuming them. Once this has occurred, those hairy appendages in the driver's seat will then latch onto the body of the now dead human, piercing through their skin, winding up and around their bones. These are the same fibrous hairs used to puppet the deceased corpse and use it to lure others aboard the bus. But these appendages have another function: they're feeding tubes. They will drain every last drop of blood from the SCP-2086's prey until the body is little more than a husk, at which point the tubes inject a saline solution directly into the cadaver. Afterwards, the inside of the bus fills with that same substance that preserves the corpse, and the process is complete. As horrifying as these creatures are, one of the few upsides of SCP-2086s is that they don't live very long. Female specimens will reproduce after 8 days and produce 20 offspring after this point. Each of these newborns reaches full maturity and size in about a week. On average, SCP-2086s live for 12 to 15 days. Another net positive is, because of their short lifespans, an SCP-2086 specimen doesn't need to feed on a human more than once, as the nutrients it absorbs as a juvenile are enough to sustain it through adulthood. Once it has matured, an SCP-2086 will go out into the nearest city or town to forage for humans, providing food to the next generation. And so the cycle continues. In the future, rather than taking the bus, maybe it's safer to walk. It might mean the difference between you making it home or becoming food.
A giant, monstrous crab-like claw closes around the throat of an unimaginably huge eel-like beast. The beast's terrible, writhing tentacles wrap around and latch onto the immense crustacean, and then the high-intensity beams of gamma radiation start flying. All the while, legions of skinless centaurs swim in the waters around them, relishing the violence. And in the middle, a lone boat, the SCPS Myther, manned by a team of mobile task force operatives that does all it can just to survive. There are those who consider outer space to be the ultimate achievement in exploration, the one place that explorers have yet to chart and understand. However, some of the murkiest mysteries in the universe are on our own planet, deep down at the bottom of the ocean. 95% of the deep ocean remains completely unexplored, and the little glimpses we have gotten paint a picture of something truly alien. Giant squids, organisms that can breathe nitrogen, luminescent predatory fish, and sharks as old as the Earth itself. Even the SCP Foundation is still struggling to fully grasp the depth of the ocean and the strange beings that dwell there. One of the most unusual aquatic findings in the history of the Foundation is that of SCP-3700. SCP-3700 refers to a circular area in the North Sea with a diameter of 800 kilometers. The waters there are abnormally deep for the region, with the seafloor resting at 5 kilometers beneath the ocean's surface. There are 2 entities present in the waters of SCP-3700, designated SCP-3700-1 and SCP-3700-2. Interactions between these 2 entities are responsible for the anomalous changes to the meteorological and geological conditions in the area. SCP-3700-1 and SCP-3700-2 always interact on the spring and fall equinoxes of any given year, but they will also engage one another throughout the year, seemingly at random. But what exactly are SCP-3700-1 and SCP-3700-2? Aside from terrifying creatures of the deep, SCP-3700-1 is an arthropod bearing an aesthetic resemblance to the European lobster, only much, much bigger, measuring 6 kilometers in length. The creature is green, with a mix of blue, yellow, pink, and red markings across the top of its exoskeleton that bear the appearance of a woman's face. It has 6 prehensile limbs, 4 of which terminate in claws, and 8 legs. The entity's 4 eyes are compound and orange, attached to stalks. Anyone who gets close enough to observe the creature's carapace in detail will notice scars, cracks, and small holes, indicating years and years of damage. SCP-3700-1 has several anomalous qualities in addition to its size. In a fight, it is able to strike with its appendages and produce cavitation bubbles with a force greater than several tons of dynamite. 2 of the entity's eyes are capable of blasting concentrated gamma radiation at a chosen target. The creature has the ability to impact the weather around it, dispersing storms that impede its ability to move with ease, and can reach speeds up to 100 kilometers an hour. In spite of its immense power, SCP-3700-1 is not aggressive and tends to ignore beings in its vicinity other than SCP-3700-2. Speaking of SCP-3700-2, it is a 32-kilometer-long entity, resembling a pelican eel in all aspects except for its massive size and the 13 appendages that encircle the middle section of its body. These appendages, which tuck inside its body when not in use, are similar to the tentacles of an octopus, complete with suckers. The majority of the entity's body consists of a sinewy tail, terminating in a sharp point. When its mouth is open, it is an estimated 3 kilometers deep. Its flesh is black, and it has white, purple, and red bioluminescent lines in the shape of a man's face on either side of its torso. SCP-3700-2's anomalous properties include the ability to invoke storms with the severity of Category 5 hurricanes, and the ability to produce whirlpools that draw in any vessel within 150 meters so that it can rip them apart. It is also able to produce high-energy sound waves, as well as blue fire, which it emits from its esophagus. When the 2 entities interact, it results in an epic struggle as each begins attempts to destroy or subdue the other. When one is victorious, immediate changes to the area follow. When SCP-3700-1 wins, the storms and harsh weather in the area will immediately calm, and an era of fertility and abundance will begin. The reproductive rates of fauna in the ocean and on the islands nearby increase threefold, and the crop yield doubles. The ocean itself becomes increasingly active, and the erosion rates of the archipelago's shores increase fivefold. When SCP-3700-2 wins, however, the weather conditions become dangerous, with raging hurricanes, rapidly fluctuating temperatures, and constantly changing storm fronts that cause destruction of buildings and loss of life. Naturally, this renders any ocean travel in the area extremely difficult or even impossible. Aquatic food sources are driven away by harsh conditions, and livestock are killed by exposure and disease. Crops are unable to thrive in the high winds, waterlogged soil, and lack of sunlight. All the while, SCP-3700-2 swims throughout the area, preying on unsuspecting ships and menacing the coastline, until SCP-3700-1 manifests to challenge it again. SCP-3700-2 will also regurgitate instances of SCP-3456, though how or why this is possible is unknown. For those unfamiliar with SCP-3456, they are a group of hairless, three-toed horse-like creatures with thick, translucent skin and human torsos fused to their backs. They are most frequently seen near sites of war, terrorist attacks, and devastating natural disasters. Direct observation of one of these entities will draw their attention to the observer, who the entity will then stalk and capture before disappearing. Due to their enormous size and ability to anomalously manifest in their home waters, SCP-3700-1 and 2 cannot be contained at a Foundation site. Instead, their containment is handled by Foundation Naval Task Force Delta-7, Northern Storm, who patrol the area in combination of refurbished battleships, destroyers, cruisers, and support craft. Additionally, measures have been taken to suppress information about SCP-3700 among the general population. Details about the unusual depth of the waters there have been stricken from public texts and scientific publications. SCP-3700-1 has been implanted with Donovian holoprojectors, which disguise it as a pod of humpback whales. If SCP-3700-1 encounters SCP-3700-2, Delta-7 may engage Protocol Winter Maelstrom. This consists of destroyers deploying harpoon-based anchors into SCP-3700-2's head to hold it in one location. Next, the vessels work together to target the entity until SCP-3700-1 is able to subdue it. If this does not prove effective and SCP-3700-2 cannot be contained, then the task force will implement Protocol Tumult. At this point, naval and civilian crafts in the area must be evacuated. Trade and ferry routes to the archipelagos must be rerouted for at least 6 months. There will be constant aerial and naval engagement with SCP-3700-2, and constant monitoring for the reappearance of SCP-3700-1. The behavior of SCP-3700-1 and SCP-3700-2 is largely very predictable, with one notable exception. On March 20th, 2017, a pair of SCP Foundation-owned battleships known as the Mither and the Terran arrived at a point between the Orkney, Shetland, and Faroe archipelagos in the North Sea. They were accompanied by the usual fleet of Delta-7 ships. Approximately 600 meters away from the ship's anchor points, the water began to emit intense bright rays of light for a duration of 3 minutes. At this point, SCP-3700-1 appeared, visible through the surface of the water. Delta-7 withdrew their anchors, speeding toward the entity. As the ships caught up to the entity, it raised 2 of its claws into the air, clicking them together in a friendly greeting. The Delta-7 ships followed the entity along its usual swimming path for 30 minutes, and during this time, all was peaceful. But this peace did not endure for long. The tide began to change, literally. As large black wall clouds formed overhead, the winds picked up, and the waves churned violently. In response, SCP-3700-1 raised its claws overhead, waving them in a circular motion and parting the clouds above it and Delta-7. But this effort took a lot out of the creature, and after 30 seconds, its antenna began to droop, and it lowered its claws. Still, the hole in the clouds remained, allowing a spot of sunshine to break through and beam down on the Foundation vessels. 600 meters ahead, the ocean waters began to rage and froth, spraying foam and surf into the air. SCP-3700-2 burst from beneath the surface, its head pointed upward. It continued to rise until the tops of its tentacles could be seen just above the water, then stopped to bend its torso and turn its head horizontally. Its jaw unhinged, exposing rows upon rows of serrated teeth. The beast let out a mighty roar, accompanied by a stream of blue flame. At the sight of its rival, SCP-3700-1 dove beneath the surface, disappearing from view. The SCP's Mither ordered the rest of the vessels to engage Protocol Winter Maelstrom. Delta-7 scattered out from SCP-3700-1's point of submersion, and all 13 destroyers fired their harpoons at SCP-3700-2, embedding themselves in the entity's head. Naturally, this enraged the creature, and it began to roar and wail, spinning its lower body vigorously enough to generate a whirlpool. The cruisers opened fire with a combination of L cannons and conventional weaponry in order to distract the entity as the destroyers pulled their harpoon lines taut, dragging its head in a continuous circle. While this was taking place, the battleships got into position and prepared to fire on the Mither's mark. 3, 2, 1, fire! The first broadside barrage collided with SCP-3700-2, and it grunted in pain, thrashing back and forth before opening its mouth and spewing an instance of SCP-3456 into the water. As soon as it hit the water, the equine monster began to cut through at a pace of 50 kilometers an hour, making its way toward the destroyers, particularly the SCP's Selkie. The Selkie attempted to retarget its weapons and prevent the creature from reaching it, but the monster moved too quickly for the Selkie to adjust. The Selkie was lifted out of the water by the creature as crew members desperately clung to the railings and their weaponry. As the crew cowered and tried to fend off the creature, it reached for them, trying to pull them from the ship. While the Selkie was occupied, SCP-3700-2 was able to attack again, blasting another ship with a stream of blue fire. A loud crack rang out from across the sea as the Selkie dropped back into the water, the SCP-3456 instance shrieking in pain. SCP-3700-1 burst through the surface, striking the creature with its club-like limbs, each blow emitting another loud crack. The third blow tore the instance in half, sending its human torso careening through the air and past the SCP's Myther. Freed from its attack, the Selkie moved full steam ahead, pulling the harpoon line taut again and dragging SCP-3700-2 out of its path. Several Selkie crew members were thrown overboard during the struggle, and as they struggled to keep their heads above water, SCP-3700-1 scooped them up, placing them onto the deck of a nearby destroyer and out of harm's way. With the crew members rescued, SCP-3700-1 set its sights on its enemy, swimming towards the edge of the whirlpool and emitting a luminescent glow from two of its eyes. The constant barrage of cannon fire on SCP-3700-2 was beginning to take its toll, and the Myther ordered the fleet to, quote, brace for the killing blow. As if responding to the Myther's call, SCP-3700-1 shot several concentrated blasts of gamma radiation at its foe, leaving large holes in the creature in their wake. SCP-3700-2 screamed, flailing so hard that it snapped the harpoon lines and created waves large enough to push the vessels backward. With its newfound freedom, SCP-3700-2 impaled SCP-3700-1 through the midsection with its barbed tip of its tail, lifting it up and out of the water with the force of the blow. SCP-3700-1 desperately tried to free itself, attacking the tail with its club-like limbs, but the fight was in vain, and after a moment, all movement stopped. SCP-3700-1 was, for at least the duration of this manifestation, dead. SCP-3700-2 tossed the corpse into the water, flinging it past Delta-7 where it crashed into the water and sank down into the depths below. At this point, Delta-7 was ordered to initiate Protocol Tumult. The Delta-7 vessels turned away from SCP-3700-2 and prepared to evacuate the area. One of the ships, the SCP-S Beast, slowed behind the rest of the fleet, emitting concerning amounts of smoke before coming to a stop. Meanwhile, the enraged and emboldened SCP-3700-2 expanded the size of its whirlpool, setting its sights on the retreating ships and the weakened Straussany Beast. The ship tried to flee, but the engines were completely shot and would not respond. The ship was caught in the whirlpool and pulled against its will toward SCP-3700-2. As the crew looked on in helpless dread, a tentacle rose from the deep, wrapping around the vessel and dragging it toward the entity's gaping maw. Suddenly, SCP-3700-1 exploded from beneath the surface of the water, leaping between the ship and SCP-3700-2, cutting the tentacle in half and freeing the Straussany Beast from its grip. SCP-3700-2 shrieked before closing its jaws and biting down on SCP-3700-1. It retaliated, emitting bright flashes of light and doing enough damage to stop SCP-3700-2 from continuing to produce its whirlpool. Another tentacle emerged from the water, pulling at SCP-3700-1's legs and ripping them from its body. But SCP-3700-1 returned the assault in kind, bludgeoning SCP-3700-2 with its club-like limbs from inside of its mouth. All at once, SCP-3700-2's lower jaw was torn out of place, dropping into the water with SCP-3700-1 still inside. SCP-3700-2 thrashed futilely, growing steadily weaker and weaker. It released one more stream of fire before collapsing. Delta-7 paused the retreat, watching the scene for any sign of a winner, but after 5 minutes, neither entity had moved. Delta-7 returned to the site of the battle to investigate and saw that neither entity was moving, and both appeared to be deceased. Shortly after Delta-7 reached the area, both entities disappeared, leaving a single, round, unidentified object that sank below the surface where SCP-3700-1 had just been. The wall clouds overhead dispersed, leaving standard cumulonimbus clouds in their place. The waters themselves remained choppy. Unsure of how to proceed, the SCP's Myther sent a radio transmission to Command. This is Delta-7 to Command. We read you, Delta-7, Command replied. We have a bit of a situation. Go ahead, Delta-7. SCP-3700-1 and 2 are both down. Command was silent for 10 seconds, utterly baffled by the information. Please repeat, Delta-7? Again, the Myther said, SCP-3700-1 and 2 are both down. Command ordered the Myther to stand by. 3 minutes of radio silence later, communication resumed as they asked, are either entity's effects active? Negative, Command. Is there any trace of either entity? Also negative. It appears the anomaly has been neutralized. Delta-7 is to return to base for debrief following any recovery efforts. With their next steps clear, Delta-7 attached the Strosny Vs to several tugboats, preparing to pull the vessel to safety. But there was one more surprise waiting. The SCP's Myther began picking up unusual levels of gamma radiation, as well as a sonar contact at a depth of 3 kilometers. They called Command requesting permission to deploy submersibles for exploration purposes. 1 minute of silence followed, as the Command arrived at a decision. Request denied. Return to base for debriefing. And so, Delta-7 began to evacuate the area once more, steaming in the opposite direction of the battle. Over the next 5 minutes, CCTV cameras on the vessels picked up an unusual sight. As the gamma radiation levels continued to increase, the ocean turbulence also worsened, tossing smaller vessels and nearly causing them to capsize. Then, all of a sudden, the waters stilled, and 4 large yellow orbs appeared below the surface, approximately 300 meters from Delta-7. They lingered there for 2 minutes before vanishing. Afterward, a new sonar contact was detected, 5 kilometers deep, directly beneath the task force. Command, we've lost the signal from the previous contact and are no longer detecting gamma radiation. We're detecting new contact 5 kilometers deep, large and metallic. After further deliberation, Command responded. Delta-7, you are authorized to deploy submersibles for exploration purposes. Be advised, should SCP-3700-2 manifest, exploration teams are to be considered lost, and you are to return to base. The consequences of this incident, as well as what else might be lurking down in the depths beneath SCP-3700, are still unknown. There's a monster under my bed. Almost every parent has heard their kids make the claim, and it's usually nothing more than some unusual shadows, or at worst a household pest scurrying around. Parents usually tell their child to go back to sleep, or maybe try to dispel their fears by shining a light under the bed. It's a childhood rite of passage, and one that usually passes soon enough. But for one young woman in Missouri, the monster under her bed was very real and very dangerous. SCP-3887-A doesn't seem like she belongs in a containment facility. She's a 24-year-old woman who lived a quiet life in her hometown until things went horribly wrong. She doesn't appear to possess any special abilities, and the Foundation is able to contain her without any difficulty. But wherever she goes, death and destruction follow. It's not her doing, but there is something out there that will not stand to see her hurt in any way. Her personal monster under the bed is very protective, something another young woman found out the hard way. Incident 3887-A-1 occurred in 2014, when the young woman was attending a party with her girlfriend. Her partner was berating and humiliating her in front of the guests, which was apparently not a rare occurrence in their relationship. Suddenly, something manifested under a nearby table, and before she could react, her girlfriend was brutally mauled by the unknown creature. Her limbs were completely severed from her body, and she died at the scene. An undercover SCP agent who was implanted within the local authorities made their way to the scene as soon as possible and found SCP-3887-A in a state of shock. And who could blame her?
after the encounter she just had with what would become to be known as SCP-3887-B. While 3887-A is a normal human with no unusual abilities or characteristics, 3887-B is anything but. Foundation scientists have described it as a humanoid entity standing over 7 feet tall. Its skin is greenish-gray, and it has 2 long, sharp horns on its head. Its head and neck are covered in thick black hair, and its eyes are a striking yellow color. Its mouth is full of sharp fangs similar to that of a shark, and its elongated arms allow it to move on all 4s. It has a long, hairless tail that resembles a rat's, and possesses both male and female reproductive organs. No one knows where it came from, but they do have an idea why it's sticking around. SCP-3887-B seems to be bonded to SCP-3887-A, and can appear in any darkened area within a 5-meter radius around her. While its favorite location is under 3887-A's bed, which has since been brought to the facility, it appears to be able to teleport wherever she is, just as it did during the party where it made its presence brutally clear. It has odd eating patterns and is able to gain nourishment from practically any object, whether it resembles what we would consider food or not. Its favorite treats, for example, SCP-3887-A's socks, but it does have one weakness that has been useful in containing it. It can't stand the light, and it doesn't just hate it. When SCP-3887-B is exposed to bright light, it develops blisters and wounds and flees to the nearest dark area. SCP Foundation scientists are at a loss to explain exactly what this creature is, though, and SCP-3887-B seems to be a chimera of multiple animals with multiple types of DNA. It possesses DNA similar to humans, but also from a type of oryx with similar horns, as well as a rat with the same type of tail, as well as a common cane toad, and there's even some DNA that doesn't resemble any creature in nature. Studying it further has been trickier though, because it seems to have the effect of disrupting any electronic recording devices near it, causing lasting damage if it's in proximity to them for too long. There has been one good bit of news for SCP scientists though, because while it has shown that it can be extremely violent, it has not attacked Foundation officials, not yet at least. Its good behavior may not have anything to do with how it personally feels about Foundation staff though, and is instead all thanks to SCP-3887-A. 3887-A has been completely cooperative since she was taken into custody by the Foundation. She doesn't perceive them as a threat, and so far it seems like SCP-3887-B is following her lead. It has a strong emotional connection to the young woman, and when they're alone, they show affectionate behavior towards each other. While the creature does not seem to like the Foundation, it doesn't seem like it wants to become hostile, until the Foundation gives it a reason to. When 3887-A was interviewed following the tragic incident by undercover Foundation agent Bellamy, she was panicked and terrified. She admitted that her partner often treated her badly, and believed that the creature was trying to protect her. She admitted that she had seen the creature before. She even had a name for it. She called her Grenda. 3887-A thought she was crazy. Now there was proof though. She was not imagining the monster under her bed. Describing Grenda as her boogeyman, the young woman talked about how she had known the creature since she was a child. She grew up in an old house in the country that was full of strange sounds that made it sound like something was in her room with her. And sometimes she would even catch a glimpse of what she thought was a monster under her bed watching her. She tried telling her parents, but they thought she was making the whole thing up. And even she was forced to wonder if she was hallucinating or had somehow imagined the whole thing. But then when she was a teenager, all of her doubts were put to bed. One night, 3887-A's parents were loudly fighting, a sadly not rare occurrence in their household, and she locked herself in her room to get away from them. As she hid, Grenda emerged from under her bed for the first time and talked with her. And she isn't the only one that Grenda is willing to speak with. She's also sat down for her own interviews with Foundation researchers. Well, the researchers sat down, while Grenda remained under the bed. Foundation researcher Dr. Tanner interviewed Grenda, who was cordial but guarded, and remained deeply protective of the girl under her protection. She expressed feeling guilty for getting 3887-A in trouble, but Dr. Tanner assured her that 3887-A was not being punished and was being kept at the Foundation for her own safety. He offered that they could keep Grenda safe as well, but she responded that as long as 3887-A remains safe, then she would be as well. She explained that her kind fed on the anxiety of children, which was why they lurked under their beds. She was apparently only supposed to remain with this girl until she was 10 or so, but became attached and decided to stay with her, which was against the rules of her people, and as a result she had been exiled from her home. At this point, Grenda offered to show herself to the researcher and began to emerge from under the bed. Unfortunately, as has become standard when attempting to document SCP-3887-B, all of the recording equipment malfunctioned and was unable to record Grenda's appearance. The Foundation continued to have questions about this pair and their strange relationship, and interviewed SCP-3887-A again, this time by a Dr. Garden. 3887-A told Dr. Garden that she had been sleeping well and had been spending lots of time talking to the entity under her bed. That led Dr. Garden to bring up a theory about how SCP-3887-B had come to exist. The young woman speculated that Grenda may have been created from her fears. One of her first memories of being scared was when she went to an aquarium and a massive bull shark came close to the glass where it bared its rows and rows of shark teeth, the exact same kind of teeth that Grenda possessed. In fact, all of the traits Grenda exhibited, like her rat tail, seemed to connect to childhood fears that she had experienced. 3887-A always felt alone as a little girl, and she believed that she might have manifested Grenda as a companion who was there exactly when she needed her to be. This raised the question of whether SCP-3887-B really was the unnatural entity, or if SCP-3887-A is the source of the entity's existence. The next interview with SCP-3887-B would raise even more questions. When Dr. Garden went to interview SCP-3887-B, it was clear that the entity was agitated. Grenda became hostile as soon as Dr. Garden entered the room, saying she was hungry and didn't want to answer questions. When Dr. Garden said that 3887-A had provided it with socks, the entity reacted with anger. The socks were just a snack. To live, it needed fear. 3887-B fed off human emotions, specifically paranoia and anxiety. SCP-3887-A used to be full of them, but now she was unusually calm in the facility, and it was having a bad effect on her companion. When Dr. Garden promised to talk to supervisors, the creature became more agitated and reached out from under the bed, grabbing Dr. Garden and pulling her under the bed. No one knew what would happen to Dr. Garden under the bed, and SCP-3887-A was quickly summoned to try to calm her companion down. But when she called for Grenda, there was no response. It was feared that Dr. Garden had been lost to the area under the bed that no one can access. But then 13 minutes later, the doctor suddenly emerged from under the bed. She was bruised, soaking wet, and missing articles including shoes, socks, and her glasses. Later interviews with Dr. Garden would give the best picture yet of where SCP-3887-B comes from. Dr. Garden described being pulled under the bed, which then led somewhere else entirely. She fell for 15 seconds, still being held by SCP-3887-B. But when she landed, she was alone in a large cave made of black rock with purple gems in the walls. The cave contained a waterfall, a lake, and what looked like SCP-3887's secret home. It was filled with pictures of the girl she was bonded to, a violin, some stuffed animals, and large piles of the girl's socks. SCP-3887-B was there in the cave with her too, watching her. She would catch glimpses of the creature, her white fangs and her yellow eyes. She was terrified and ran screaming, trying to find any way out of there as the creature pursued her. She couldn't evade her forever though, and eventually Grenda grabbed Dr. Garden. She was lifted into the air as Grenda bared her shark-like teeth. But instead of eating her, the creature instead took off the doctor's socks and thanked her, before somehow sending her back up into the darkness. She then found herself back under the bed, surrounded by worried SCP personnel. Since then, SCP-3887-B has not brought anyone else into its home. It seems feeding on Dr. Garden's fear was enough for the time being, and the situation has remained stable since. The SCP Foundation has been able to develop relatively simple containment procedures for the two entities that make up SCP-3887, as neither is currently hostile. The two are contained within a standard humanoid containment cell with the bed at the center. SCP-3887-A is given standard amenities, a healthy diet including a vitamin for some minor health issues, and her own control over the lights in the cell. She has requested and been given a gaming system for entertainment and up-to-date entertainment media, but was denied access to the internet, a pet cat, and access to the on-site recreation areas, due to the risk of SCP-3887-B getting loose. The facility does have plans in place in case Grenda decides to become hostile again though. While SCP-3887-A normally maintains control of the lights in her cell, the Foundation has a failsafe installed so they can turn them up at any time. Since SCP-3887-B reacts negatively to bright light, the lights can be used as a security system to send her retreating back under the bed until she can be pacified through other measures. While neither of the SCP-3887 entities appears to be seeking to escape, it is impossible to predict where and how 3887-B would act if 3887-A was free from her cell again, and whether she would attempt to harm those she perceives as a threat to 3887-A as she did in the past. So for now, the Foundation is focused on keeping both of them pacified, which in the case of 3887-B means a healthy supply of socks. But there's one other lingering question the Foundation hasn't solved. SCP-3887-B referenced being exiled from its kin for breaking the rules and was confined to a cave. That means there might be others like Grenda out there, and they may be more aggressive and less scrupulous than she is. While no other specimens have been found, the SCP Foundation will be keeping a careful eye on any reports of monsters lurking under children's beds. They might just be telling the truth.
It was 1965, and the Chicago PD was investigating a meatpacking plant reported to be the home of a devil-worshipping cult, complete with allegations of human sacrifice. There, the cops were met with heavy resistance. A firefight broke out between the police and the occult worshippers who flooded out of the plant's basement. The cops were pinned down and in trouble, but they had a secret weapon, heavily armed and decked out in sophisticated ballistic armor and covered in strange insignia. Mobile Task Force Epsilon 9, also known as the Fire Eaters, here to assist the cops on behalf of the SCP Foundation. As always with the Foundation, they had no interest in some mere human cultists. Those were a dime a dozen in the world of anomalous monsters. What the Foundation had taken an interest in was who or what these cultists were worshipping. It all begun a few weeks back, near Danforth Meatpacking, an abandoned meatpacking plant just outside of Chicago. No one had given the place a thought in decades, that is, until people started going missing. Rumors spread of people being snatched in the surrounding woods by figures dressed in robes. Mysterious voices and noises were said to be coming out from the cavernous belly of the plant. Some even reported seeing smoke rising out of the building. Thick, black, noxious smoke. Something was terribly wrong here. Something was anomalous. The Chicago Police Department Strike Force, in association with the Fire Eaters from the Foundation, mobilized at Danforth Meatpacking. While the police were initially reluctant to work with these mysterious figures, they turned out to be indispensable for the raid. There were 47 cultists holding out in the basement of the plant, many of them heavily armed and all of them hopped up on zealous devotion to their unknown master. All except one of the cultists fought to the death during a tense firefight with Chicago PD and the Fire Eaters. The single survivor was still heavily injured and was taken to a secure Foundation facility for emergency treatment and debriefing. Typically, the Foundation would need to perform extensive tests on the Danforth meatpacking plant to discover the source of the anomaly's activity. However, this time, it was a Chicago detective who asked the question that busted the case wide open. The hell's with the giant pig? And while it would turn out to be a whole lot more than that, there was indeed a giant iron furnace shaped like a pig in the center of the facility. Measuring 15 meters by 25 meters by 20 meters at its widest points, the thing was a behemoth. It had an internal furnace despite no apparent fuel source, and a 5-centimeter slot of unknown purpose on the side of the machine's immense rusted hide. Naturally, all the police officers involved in the raid had their memories wiped and restructured, and they were lucky, because they'd remain forever ignorant of the true horrors about to unfold in the confines of that godforsaken factory. As is standard procedure, the plant was isolated, and a Foundation research team, led by lead researcher Westron, under the authority of Regional Director Caleb, was installed on the new provisional site to conduct tests. Other than everyone feeling somewhat uneasy around it, this new anomaly, dubbed SCP-4511, didn't seem to exhibit any strange activities save for its perpetually burning fire. But during the initial research period, a small white card suddenly popped out of the slot in SCP-4511's side. A researcher carefully approached and looked at the card. There was writing. It said, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied." Though nobody on the team had any idea what this meant. After going through a shootout with a considerable death toll to get to it, having a giant metal pig-shaped furnace spit out a cryptic card was strange. But at the secret medical facility where the surviving cultist was being held, things were about to get a whole lot stranger. As he lay in a bed suffering from his injuries, he pulled one of the medical staff close and uttered cryptic, dying words. "Give whatever it demands, or your suffering will be beyond measure." He expired seconds later, less than 72 hours after the raid. Back at the meatpacking plant, at the exact same time, another white card was produced by the machine, reading, "Current demand, the metal teeth that endlessly churn. Period. 1 week." Perhaps this entity was a little more intelligent than they thought. A number of researchers on the team, invigorated by this new development, were eager to press forward with experiments. Lead researcher Westron, however, did not share their enthusiasm. Something about this entire situation felt like a grim omen to him. This entity had a plan far beyond their understanding, and on some deep animal level, he knew that helping this thing see its plans through would lead to disastrous results. On this first gut impulse, he denied the request for further experiments, but Regional Director Caleb had other ideas. Caleb overruled Westron's command, and the experiments began shortly after. The entity, jokingly nicknamed the Swine God by researchers, had made its demand. The metal teeth that endlessly churn. But what could that mean? It wasn't long before the entity began to produce more cards, each with their own strange and esoteric demands. However, on some instinctual level, the researchers at the site understood the demands perfectly. The next card's demand was, "The metal of this suffocating prison." Upon receiving this demand, researchers collected scrap metal from around the new site and tossed them into the furnace beyond the swine god's jaws one by one. Inside, they heard the sound of metal crunching. Hours later, all the other metal in the site began to rapidly oxidize and rust, though SCP-4511 itself remained unaffected. The card that came after delivered another simple request. "Oil to slicken my frozen joints." The researchers understood and procured 3 large barrels of oil and tossed them into the furnace. The entity let out a deep gurgle before shaking violently and expelling excess oil, rusted metal, and 2 domesticated pig femurs. It turns out that the swine god had an appetite for pigs, as the next card that rumbled out of the machine bore the request, "2 of my children, made in my image, made in flesh." In response, the researchers provided the entity with 2 adult pigs. Just like the previous requests, they too were tossed into the fiery depths of the giant pig's mouth, from which came the horrible sounds of pigs squealing, and then a low, guttural gurgling. Next, the request was, "The hooks used to hang my children's corpses." To satisfy this request, the researchers provided 17 meat hooks.
In response, 4511 spat out a metal sphere at an extremely high velocity, killing observing Foundation Agent McHenry. For reasons that weren't apparent at the time, rather than giving Agent McHenry a proper burial, his body was also fed into the hungry machine. Lead researcher Westron's concerns were mounting, but that didn't amount to much now. 4511 had developed a taste for flesh, and the researchers were all too eager to obey its command. On the swine god's order, it was fed a German shepherd. An hour later, the entity spat out some teeth, 6 of which came from a dog and 1 from a human. More than once, it released a card with a blunt request. A worker for the line. The researchers knew exactly what this meant. It required a human sacrifice. SCP-4511 was given 2 D-Class personnel. One was flung back out seconds later, crunched and burned to death, with several internal organs missing. The other had a more mysterious and altogether upsetting fate. The second D-Class was heard screaming in the belly of the furnace for roughly 2 hours. 34 minutes later, a strange liquid was excreted by the machine. When the liquid was tested, they found trace amounts of chemicals like pig urine and motor oil, but most disturbing of all, human genetic material that was identical to that of lead researcher Westron. It seemed that the swine god had finally taken an interest in him. After some final requests for large quantities of coal and even human children to fuel its fires, it made a request that sent the whole thing crashing down. The false foreman, delivered to my maw to prove your faith. Lead researcher Westron knew what this meant. They all did. The swine god was demanding him in sacrifice. Lead researcher Westron tried to shut down the entire project, but the swine god was faster than him. One of his own researchers shot Westron in the leg, as the others gathered round and forcibly restrained him. He tried to reason with his subordinates, but it didn't do him any good. The swine god had crawled into all their minds and corrupted them. They were his servants now, and Westron was doomed. Despite his protests, the servants forced him into the mouth of SCP-4511, and after a little over 4 minutes of screaming, Westron was devoured just like all the other sacrifices. Upon receiving news of the horrors unfolding in the Danforth meatpacking plant, Regional Director Caleb declared the security of the site compromised and sent in Mobile Task Force Epsilon 11, aka the Nine-Tailed Fox. The 4 elite MTF soldiers were given the simple instruction to figure out exactly what had happened and to eliminate any potentially compromised Foundation staff members who'd fallen under the swine god's power. When the team arrived, they realized just how far gone the whole place was. Almost everyone was dead, having been sacrificed to the machine, and the ones that were left were completely insane. They attacked the task force, shouting in their madness about how no matter what the Foundation does to them, it would be nothing compared to what it would do. It had them all under its rusty iron foot. The team was forced to fend off repeated attacks from the pig's devotees, and even found the powers of the swine god starting to affect their own minds. The beast was more powerful and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The trained Foundation researchers and guards had been transformed into the same cultists they'd fought to gain control of the building by the mind-bending power of the swine god. The MTF were forced to retreat and return with reinforcements to truly clean the place out. Once a slaughterhouse, always a slaughterhouse. At this point, Regional Director Caleb took personal responsibility over the casualties, since he'd been the one who signed off on the experiments in the first place. He gave up his Regional Director rank and deemed himself the new lead researcher on the 4511 case. Now that he fully understood the scope and danger of the entity they were dealing with, he wanted to lead the charge in discovering more about the anomaly and hopefully someday negating its deadly effects. This may sound like a happy ending, in spite of all the violence, bloodshed, and human sacrifice that brought us here. But beware of the premature celebration. Despite investigation, the swine god retained no evidence of the objects, animals, and people it consumed and burned. Perhaps it burnt them down to their very atoms, if those even still existed. What we do know is that not long after lead researcher Caleb and his subordinates installed themselves into the facility, SCP-4511 produced one more little white card. It read, "Current demand, a flock of my own, satisfied."
And if we've learned anything today, it's that the swine god gets whatever it demands. A brutal truth that lead researcher Caleb is likely to understand much sooner than he thought.
Jack was swimming deep underwater, wondering why he had such a pounding headache when suddenly he had a terrifying realization. He had no idea where he was or what he was doing. There was a nagging feeling that he must have a specific reason to be here. You don't just end up deep in the ocean with a diving suit on by chance. Yet he had no idea what he was supposed to be doing. He wasn't sure he cared either. He was more worried about the throbbing pain in his head and the vision of two eyes staring at him out of the dark that he couldn't get out of his mind. His heart began to race as he wondered what to do and how to get help. He was in the middle of the ocean and appeared to be all alone. He couldn't see anything in the dark water except for this weird gray substance in front of him. Maybe he was gonna die here alone. Without knowing if anyone could even hear him, he began to speak aloud about how he was consumed by sickness and that darkness was all around him. This is the story of one of the most powerful and dangerous anomalies yet discovered, SCP-3000. Before Jack's descent into despair, the SCP Foundation had mandated an exploratory expedition off the coast of Bangladesh. After receiving a few strange reports from locals and fishermen, the Foundation suspected an SCP was lurking in the water and positioned a few personnel to investigate. The crew expected danger, or maybe even death. But what they got instead was far stranger and more ominous. All of the men had been verified to be in sound mental states when the mission set out, but a few of them reported feeling strange and uneasy as the submarine descended into the ocean. Before long, a veteran agent named Dr. Williams began to panic in a way that was completely out of character. He started sweating profusely, shaking, and wouldn't listen to a word of comfort or reason that anybody tried to offer. It might seem like a relatively normal reaction for anyone descending into the depths of the ocean to meet with a monster that they don't know anything about, but Dr. Williams was a seasoned professional who had been on hundreds of such missions before. There was no logical reason for him to act like this. Although the reaction of Dr. Williams was the most extreme, he wasn't the only one who started to feel strange. Multiple agents developed a creeping feeling of unease that swept over them. One of the calmer men tried to reason with Dr. Williams, asking him what was wrong and if he could explain exactly how he was feeling. That's when things got even stranger. Not only was the doctor extremely anxious, but he now seemed incapable of giving a real response to any questions thrown at him. He could only mutter that he was missing something, but he wasn't sure what. Knowing that many SCPs can bend reality and the human mind, many of the personnel began to have second thoughts about the mission and even asked for permission to call off the mission. But they were mandated to continue, so they went on. As the team went deeper and deeper into the ocean, things only got worse. Even the previously calm crew members became spooked and antsy, while the ones who were already anxious were now sweating and jittering. As for Dr. Williams, he was now pacing back and forth around the submarine, saying things nobody could understand. Every time he looked at his colleagues and his close friends, he seemed to stare straight through them and would call them by the wrong names. It was as if his mind had moved to a different dimension. Whenever someone asked him to perform his normal duties, he looked more confused than ever. Still, the team went deeper. Dr. Williams began to whimper and say the word no repeatedly, growing louder and louder until he was screaming, and the others were forced to sedate him. Just then, something came into view. It was what would come to be known as SCP-3000. The thing was huge, so huge that its whole body couldn't be seen out of the submarine window. It was a horrible eel-looking creature with a head as big as a town and haunting eyes that lit up the black ocean around it. But perhaps the strangest part was this giant eel seemed to be producing a weird gray liquid. Even the sedative wasn't enough to keep Dr. Williams calm anymore. There was a strange blank look in his eyes as if the light and life had left him, and he just began screaming no repeatedly again and wouldn't respond to any attempts to calm him down. Not that anyone else was very capable of calming him down at this point. Even the crew members that had been holding up well were starting to act strangely, and nobody could get the image of these ominous eyes out of their heads. Then things went from bad to worse. Williams began screaming and shouting madly as if he was being tortured by an unseen force. The men tried to restrain him, but it was no use. He began smashing his head against the submarine window until it cracked, putting the whole mission and everyone's life at risk. He fell to the ground injured, chanting that there was nothing, whatever that meant. It was an emergency scenario. They began applying first aid to Williams as the submarine ascended to the surface as quickly as possible before the pressure of the ocean caused the cracked window to explode. By the time they reached the surface, Williams was dead. But there was something even more chilling than the circumstances of his death. Every single man who had been in that submarine experienced the same thing on the days that came afterward. The image of the eel-like creature's eyes seemed burned in their minds permanently. It would haunt their waking hours for the rest of their lives, and sleep was no escape either, as they would appear in both their dreams and nightmares alike, forever. A second mission had to be sent to gather more information about the strange beast. Already, there were many theories and question marks surrounding SCP-3000. How big was it really? Was it sentient? What was the liquid for? None of the men who had been on the previous mission were willing to return to the waters, but a new group of brave recruits volunteered. They were about to find out what so many in history have learned the hard way, that bravery and foolishness are often mistaken for the same thing. This time, the mission would not be in a submarine, but in dive suits, in order to observe the anomaly in even closer detail, and to eliminate the chance of one team member self-sabotaging the submarine, killing them all. They were transported to the location by boat, and the three men splashed into the ocean. They descended, and at first everything was going well. In case anything went wrong, the three of them were tethered together for extra security. But the deeper into the ocean they swam, and the closer they got to SCP-3000's location they got, the stranger things became, just like on the last mission. First, there were a few minor cases of confusion. One of the team, Jack, thought it was his responsibility to lead the navigation, but another, Roberto, also thought it was his job. In fact, navigation was actually the job of a third team member, Amir, but he seemed to have forgotten. Everyone was getting confused. The team listening in on the conversations at the Foundation headquarters grew increasingly concerned about what they could hear. Was everyone losing their minds? Hopefully, nobody was about to pull another Dr. Williams on them. Still, the project leads couldn't afford to tell the men to come back to the surface. The Foundation badly needed any information they could get on this SCP, whatever the cost, so they told the men to press on. Things only got worse. Roberto was asking to speak to a colleague who passed away 2 years ago, while the others began to mutter indistinguishable phrases about eyes and darkness, not too dissimilar to the ramblings of Dr. Williams. It increasingly began to look like a suicide mission. Then, there was silence. What was going on? Each of the men had completely lost it, to the point that they cut the tether that was holding them together. All alone, Jack couldn't remember where he was or why he was here. He desperately looked around to try and gauge his surroundings, but he could only see darkness. All he could think about was a pair of large eyes and an overwhelming fear of despair and anxiety, and this weird gray fluid that was now floating in front of him. The Foundation listened as Jack started reciting a creepy speech about being on the edge of nothing, inches from oblivion, with a sickness in his mind and nothing but a pair of eyes in front of him. They listened in horror as they heard movement through the radio. It sounded like a huge creature was swimming toward the men. It had to be SCP-3000, but all three men were too confused to do anything about the situation or to even see what was in front of them, claiming they couldn't see anything in the darkness. There was silence for half a minute, with the team listening in, fearing the worst. Then they heard some more unintelligible mutterings. The men must be alive, but what on earth was going on? Then the gibberish started again. Two of the men were screaming that Jack had just been swallowed whole and that they were being sucked in too. Why couldn't they just swim away? It was chaos. But then a few moments later, Roberto spoke into the radio, saying he was floating alone in the middle of the ocean and had now moved away from the eyes of SCP-3000. He finally seemed capable of forming coherent thoughts and speech. After what had just happened, Roberto now had a theory. He thought that somehow it was impossible to think straight around SCP-3000. When he'd been close enough to see the eyes, Roberto had felt a throbbing pain in his brain and been unable to think about anything. Perhaps it was something to do with that mysterious gray liquid. Even more slime was coming out of SCP-3000 now, and Roberto was determined to get a sample despite the warnings from HQ. In one final burst of motivation, he swam close enough to take some of the gray liquid and put it in a special sample collection unit that was designed to float to the surface for collection later. He had acquired some very important data, but he seemed to have lost all hope of preserving his life. Roberto started telling the team over the radio that he was dying and that his heart rate was too high, but cautioned that it would be too dangerous for anyone to try and rescue him. The personnel continued to try and communicate with Roberto to figure out what was going on, but his words had stopped making any sense until finally he went quiet. Minutes turned into hours, hours into days, and still there was no sign of Roberto or the rest of the divers. After 3 days, his radio, which had only been sending a steady stream of static, finally stopped working altogether and he was presumed dead. However, the sample Roberto had collected had survived and made it to the hands of the Foundation researchers. It turned out to be a viscous substance now known as Y909, a chemical compound and extremely strong anesthesia. Y909 causes head pain, paranoia, fear, panic, memory loss, and confusion, explaining what happened to Dr. Williams and the diving trio. The collection of Y909 might have resulted in 2 disastrous missions, but there's a silver lining as the substance ended up becoming an invaluable tool for the SCP Foundation. Its ability to make people forget what had just happened to them can be used to eliminate knowledge of threatening SCPs among the public. It also helps the Foundation staff cope with the traumatic experiences they encounter on their missions. Although other amnestics can be used for the same purpose, none are as powerful as the one produced by SCP-3000. Before its discovery, the amnestics used would break down too quickly, not fare well in storage, or cause undesirable side effects. The only problem is the method of sourcing. The only way to obtain Y909 is somewhat ethically questionable for most people. SCP-3000 produces Y909 after eating, so the best way to stock up on it is by feeding the creature. Sedated, D-Class personnel from the Foundation are sent on missions supposedly to observe the anomaly up close, unaware that this mission is one way only. Other divers are then sent later to collect the fluid from a safe distance and store it. Of course, it's all for the greater good of humanity. Now, the Foundation protects SCP-3000 as best as it can guard something hundreds of kilometers long. The area is carefully patrolled, and members of the public are not allowed to enter the part of the bay where it resides. Anybody who accidentally comes into contact is contained. Eventually, another pair of Foundation doctors went down in a submarine to try and learn more about SCP-3000. One became so affected by Y909 that he began hallucinating. He started talking about Anantashesha, the king of serpents in Hinduism. Anantashesha is believed to be all that will be left after the end of the world because it exists throughout all of time simultaneously. The doctor said he believed that this was in fact Anantashesha, that SCP-3000 simply shows us that eventually everyone dies and fades into the darkness of oblivion, right before he exited the submarine and swam right into his mouth. Luckily for now, SCP-3000 seems to be in a sort of hibernation state. It rarely moves and it doesn't hunt, although it will eat when fed. But no one knows when or if it'll wake, or what it's capable of if it does. Will it destroy the world, or simply drive us all insane?
Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to? Something that made you feel off? Something you regret? Secrets like these are best kept to yourself. But since you're still alive, whatever you saw wasn't nearly as bad as what Peter Holland saw one fateful night in January of 2015. Peter was an unremarkable man, an office worker, slaving away at the daily grind. And like a lot of people, Peter enjoyed nothing more than coming home after a long, hard day, kicking back and watching some TV. It was this innocent activity that led to Peter's horrifying brush with SCP-5049, altering the course of his otherwise average life forever. The event started at around 10:05 p.m. Peter was channel surfing, glued to the couch in his sparsely furnished apartment. Commercials, commercials, commercials. As far as Peter's tired eyes could see. He paused for a moment to watch the end of an ad for a car he could never hope to afford on his salary. But something stopped him from changing the channel again. The next ad had begun, and it was playing a strange, scratchy jingle that gave Peter an odd sense of unease. But even stranger than that was the text on screen. Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot in baby blue bubble lettering. He forced a smile. This had to be some weird comedy skit or viral marketing campaign, or maybe it was something he drank. But no, this was a real commercial, and things were about to get even weirder. The peppy logo faded to a concerning sight. A tall humanoid figure dressed like a used car salesman, but one that definitely wasn't human. His skin was dark green and covered in patches of thick fur. He had long fingers with intimidating claws and a grin full of needle-like fangs. It looked almost demonic, and after a few seconds, the demon began to speak.
Hey there, folks, it's your man, Demon Dan, coming at you with the latest and greatest deals from Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. We've just accepted a shipment of brand new models that would make even the most discerning customers weep with excitement. Let's see what we've got.
The creature, apparently named Demon Dan, stepped away from his desk, revealing two long, furry goat legs that ended in large, pointed hooves. Peter now assumed he really was going crazy, but at this point he was along for the ride.
Demon Dan continued his pitch.
Looking to make your way through the capitalist hellscape that makes home look cozy? Come try one of our newest businessman models.
Dan gestured behind him to where Peter was horrified to see a total of 52 adult male human bodies hanging from a wall. There was something uncanny about them. They seemed almost hollow, like a highly realistic costume or a prop from a horror movie. Peter didn't have much time to think about it though, as Demon Dan went on.
If you're looking for an extra challenge of inequality, the businesswoman model may be a right fit for you.
The commercial then revealed a wall of human female bodies strung up in a similar fashion.
Now, you may be thinking, but Dan, business sounds hard, I just want to have some fun. And the fine team here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot have got you covered.
The camera zoomed out to show an area of the store filled with children's decorations, and more of these strange, hollowed-out human suits in child sizes to match.
And who has more fun than kids? No one, that's who. For a limited time, the purchase of any child-size unit comes with a complimentary 50% off coupon for parental units. You just can't say no to a deal like that.
Before Peter could process the madness that was unfolding before him, the camera cut again. The store's logo appeared on the screen once more, along with several cuts to locations around the store itself. There were more human bodies, hundreds of them. Demon Dan's sleazy voice rang out over all of it.
Here at Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, we know it's not all fun and games. The bravest among us have a mission to accomplish. The Seven Lords are ever planning their invasion after all, so you're looking for function over form. Well, we've got that in spades down here in the Tactical Services Department. You'll be kicking ass in no time when you're wearing the latest models at the best prices.
Seven Lords? Invasion? What did any of this mean? Suddenly, the camera was showing him a new room. Red curtains parted, revealing more of these person suits, several bearing a striking resemblance to real human celebrities. He managed to make out Gucci Mane, Avril Lavigne, Paul McCartney, and Britney Spears before Demon Dan's appearance once again drew his attention.
I've got a special treat for you. We're happy to announce the VIP Lookalike Department. We all know how difficult the creation of Homunculus is. It's a fine art that takes years of practice. So when a replacement order on VIPs comes in, every detail needs to be perfect. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. But for the right price, you too can look like famous icons from around the globe.
The image of celebrity bodies faded from view, and Peter was left looking at the grinning Demon Dan standing behind the front desk of his impossible store once more. He said,
"There you have it, folks. Come on down to Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. If you're viewing the advertisement, then you've been selected for entry. Please enter the nearest door for instant deals and upgrade those old duds for one of our newest models. What are you waiting for? Come on down."
The logo popped up again, hovering above some bold text that said, "Please enter the nearest door." Peter had had enough. He switched off the TV. What a horror show, he thought. They should just warn you before they put short horror films on TV like that. He had no idea they could just slip them in among regular commercials. Surely Demon Dan and his store couldn't be real, right? But as his eyes drifted to the door in his room, he didn't feel quite so certain. Well, there was only one way to find out. Peter got up, went over to the door, took a deep breath, and walked through it. Peter Holland was never seen again, not as himself, anyway. The SCP Foundation has long been aware of this sinister transmission, known as SCP-5049-2, and luckily has found ways to prevent it from claiming more victims. The Foundation Television Analysis Department, as well as webcrawler 40Y40, which is the software the Foundation uses to root out anomalous activity online, are always vigilant for signs of Demon Dan's commercial running. Just observing Demon Dan, who is himself classified as SCP-5049-A, and his ads put you in immediate danger, as they can transform any nearby doors into SCP-5049-1s. Those are interdimensional portals that remain active for around 15 minutes after viewing the ad. So then what specifically is SCP-5049? It's the entire pocket dimension known as Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, a Kettier-class spatial anomaly constantly on the lookout for new human victims, which it transforms into fleshy suits for its demonic clients, which let them blend in around humans.
Prior to its discovery by the Foundation, it's likely that Demon Dan and his associates claimed hundreds, if not thousands, of lives. But sadly, even discovering this anomaly came at a gruesome cost to the Foundation. On February 16, 2020, the ad played on Safe Storage Warehouse 13's break room television. At the time of the broadcast, 4 Foundation personnel were present, including Security Agent William Birkin. Worrying that this was a potential security threat, Agent Birkin investigated the door to a nearby closet. The second he opened it, he was transformed to the storefront of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot. He saw Demon Dan himself standing at the corner, while 4 smaller reptilian imps fought over a small flesh suit. Demon Dan scolded them, before turning his attention to Agent Birkin. Tis, you aren't supposed to be here, little man. How naughty. I'm gonna have to have a word with marketing once I'm through with you. Agent Birkin, fearing for his safety, drew his weapon and shot Demon Dan 3 times. The creature dematerialized, before appearing right next to Agent Birkin and disarming him with a swift chop. The unfortunate security agent was then grabbed by the considerably larger Demon Dan and thrown over Dan's shoulder. We know all of this because Agent Birkin's standard issue Foundation body camera recorded the whole terrifying ordeal, even as Demon Dan dragged the helpless Birkin back into the twisted workshop behind the store. There, Birkin saw what would soon be his own fate right before his eyes. Dan's minions converting human bodies into fleshy suits for their demon clientele, and this unfortunate security officer was next. Dan gave him over to a pair of large sheep-like demons, and told them to drain, skin, and declaw him. Birkin's video feed finally cut as the demons pulled out their rusty tools and began to work on him. Of course, the SCP Foundation wouldn't take an attack on one of their operatives, inside one of their facilities no less, lying down. The unfortunate death of William Birkin allowed the Foundation to refine their methods of intercepting the broadcast of Demon Dan's commercials. They even had a new mobile task force, Mobile Strike Force Kappa 11, or the Baphomet Bashers, specifically to deal with Demon Dan and his cronies. They did more than just prevent him from taking new humans, though. When the Baphomet Bashers teamed up with an A-class clairvoyant entity to improve their efficiency in predicting future broadcasts, they were able to launch sting operations and arrest 21 different demonic customers for interrogation. This impressive strike back finally gave the Foundation some meaningful leverage over Demon Dan. And through the use of their clairvoyant entity, they were able to call a temporary truce and arrange a meeting with Demon Dan himself. Captain Steiner, an agent of the Foundation External Negotiation Department, was the one to interrogate Demon Dan. They sat across from each other at a table, and Demon Dan was clearly tense, frustrated with the way the Foundation had been messing with his business. All of their sting operations were frightening off his customers. In return for letting him continue his work, the Foundation wanted Dan to turn over all the information on his bosses and customers, allowing the Foundation to track their movements. When Dan was evasive about whether he'd comply, they tried threatening him. Dan laughed them off. Go ahead, take your best shot, little man. There's a dozen more just like me. You won't stop anything. Finally, he was pressured into giving a yes or no answer as to whether he'd willingly collaborate with the Foundation and act as an informant against his kind. When Demon Dan hinted that he may be willing to comply, he began to make a horrifying gurgling noise and gripped his head in pain. He began speaking in Latin in a voice that wasn't his own, as though the 7 demon lords he served were speaking through him. They said, "You are a fool, jailer, to think a pathetic morsel such as this could aid you against us. I have allowed you to toil in your own delusions for far too long. You may have taken advantage of Asmodeus all those years ago, but you stop nothing. You hinder nothing. You jail and barter to no avail. Your time is coming." And then Demon Dan's head exploded, which obviously prevented him from giving any incriminating information on those he worked for. Whoever the Demon Lords are, they're certainly the secretive type. You may think that this is the end of Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot and of SCP-5049, but soon another ad ran. It advertised the same products and services out of the same store. The only difference was that this time,
a different entity was starring in it. It's the holiday season. Outside it's cold and there's snow blanketing the ground, but inside you're warm and gathered around the light of a roaring fireplace and a glowing Christmas tree. This is what Christmas is all about: warmth, joy, and togetherness. But just because you're comfortable doesn't mean you're safe. You were so busy opening presents and stuffing yourself at dinner that you didn't notice the face pressed up against the window. That long, gaunt face with the staring eyes, the wide mouth full of yellow teeth, and the scraggly white beard. You don't know it yet, but within a few days, you'll be dead. You might be able to avert this horrible fate if you knew what exactly you were dealing with. SCP-4666, also known as the Yule Man, a Keter-class Christmas monster so violent, sadistic, and terrifying, he makes Krampus look like Jolly Saint Nick. And this year, just like every other, he's planning on being very, very naughty. The SCP Foundation began cataloging the Yule Man in 1974 after a string of violent and eerily similar home invasions during the holiday season. But they have reason to believe that this entity has been around for a whole lot longer. Over 2,000 years, in fact. Stories that describe what look to be Yule Man massacres date back as far as the 1st century BC in Scandinavia, and there have been reports of similar clusters of events happening around the same time every year since. This monster is prolific, and may have one of the highest body counts of any creature under observation by the Foundation. The Yule Man's trail of destruction became clearer in the 18th century, as accounts of the carnage it leaves became more detailed. Later still, authorities even managed to find physical evidence like the Yule Man's fingerprints, which are similar to human fingerprints but display a distinct double whorl pattern not seen in human fingerprints. Much about the anomalous nature of the Yule Man is still unknown though, and the Foundation has yet to discover an effective way to contain it. Their only hope is intercepting it before it can get its long, gnarled fingers on its intended prey. Maybe you're feeling worried, or that you're being watched. You have good reason to be afraid, because during his yearly active period, the 12 days between December 21st and January 2nd, he's always searching for prey. Nowhere is safe, because while it was initially believed that he only appeared to those who live north of 40 degrees latitude, it's now believed that much like Santa Claus, the Yule Man operates worldwide. Anyone could be in his sights right now, blissfully unaware of the nightmare coming down the tracks towards them. Thankfully, the SCP Foundation, through analysis of these attacks, which are known as Weihnacht events, they've been able to find certain patterns. But first, what does the creature known as the Yule Man even look like? Much like SCP-096, the Yule Man is a long and lanky humanoid, standing about 2 meters tall, who resembles an emaciated human of European descent, and never wears any clothes or other coverings despite the frigid temperatures he operates in. You might be sad if you're spending Christmas alone, but it at least guarantees you safety from the Yule Man, as he only appears at the homes of families with a child under the age of 8 present. He also seems to favor isolated and rural locations, and Weihnacht events only occur when there's a healthy covering of snow on the ground during the event, hence the name, which means White Night in English. It's also vital that you recognize the 3 distinct stages of a Weihnacht event too, or you won't be seeing much of the new year. The first stage occurs during the space of a week. Children in the home might start to seem worried or afraid. They might tell you that they see something strange in the distance. The figure of a man they don't recognize, standing just far enough away that you can't fully make him out, except that he's really tall. Of course, you probably won't see anything, and your instinct will be to tell them there's nothing to be afraid of. Even when they tell you, through tears, that there's a man pressing his face up against their bedroom window at night. But they are right to be afraid, and you should be too. Already at this point, your only hope is to try and spread the word as soon as possible. Report the incident to the local police, write about it on Facebook, tweet about it, whatever it takes. The SCP Foundation has operatives trawling the internet and monitoring police reports constantly during this period, especially for reports of mysterious men in the snow watching homes from a distance. Getting the Foundation's attention is your best hope of stopping this thing. And if you don't, next comes Stage 2.
taking place between nights 8 and 11 of the active period. No longer will the Yule Man just be lurking on the periphery. Now he's getting closer. You'll start to hear strange noises in your attic or on the roof. Noises that sound almost like footsteps. That's crazy, you think. It's probably just an animal. But then the smell starts. An awful rotten stench that fills the house. But no matter how hard you look, you can't find the source. Finally, on the last night of December, you'll tell yourself that you'll take this matter to the police. But of course, it's already too late. The Yule Man is here for the 12th night. The Weihnacht is finally upon you. At this point, one of two scenarios will happen. In the first, you and your entire family will be tortured and murdered, except the youngest child, who the Yule Man will kidnap. The SCP Foundation keeps files on a number of notable instances of this kind of Weihnacht, and the details are truly gruesome. Reports of incidents have involved crucifixion, the removal of tongues, burning, dismemberment, post-mortem bite marks, and decapitation. In all instances, though, the entire family was killed except the youngest child, who simply disappeared. The Yule Man is a merciless and sadistic beast. You're now probably wondering, if that's the first of two Weihnacht possibilities, what's the second? In the second, if you're tremendously lucky, you and your family will survive. But that doesn't mean you won't face a grisly experience. In this scenario, which occurs during about 15% of Weihnacht events, you'll hear footsteps throughout the night, but thankfully you wake up alive. And when you do so, there are gifts waiting for you. The problem is, all these gifts are made out of human body parts. For example, in 1976 in Canada, one family received the gift of a ball made from a severed human head wrapped in skin. In Kazakhstan in 1903, a family received a flute made from a hollowed-out human femur. And in the Netherlands in 2003, a family received a wooden hairbrush covered in human teeth ranging from 400 years old to a mere few days. These gruesome gifts are referred to as SCP-4666-A, and it was one of these gifts that gave us the best insight yet available into the true nature of the Yule Man. Several gifts were dropped off at a family's residence in Hoonah, Alaska in 2018, but most notably among them was the horrific SCP-4666-A-0960, a life-size doll made from a human body with its eyes removed and mouth sewn shut. Worst of all, though, was that the girl was still alive. The family who received this twisted gift was given ME sticks by the Foundation, and the living doll was taken for medical treatment. Before succumbing to her extensive injuries, the girl was able to deliver some insights into what exactly happened to the children who were abducted during Weihnacht events. The children taken by the Yule Man are forced into a large sack that seems much bigger on the inside than it appears as he makes his rounds, traveling from house to house, murdering and kidnapping. His victims are taken to a kind of underground grotto and workshop filled with bones, like a twisted Santa's workshop, where they're forced to make toys out of the bodies of their fellow victims. During this time, the Yule Man will continue to torture and torment his victims. He'll even take some of them away to cook and eat whenever he feels like it. When asked how she was turned into this human doll, the girl told Foundation personnel that her fellow victims were forced to turn her into this by the Yule Man when she became too weak to continue making toys herself. Her chilling last words were, "When you can't make the toys, you become the toys." So if strange things happen to you and your family between the 21st of December and the 1st of January, don't ignore it. After all, you never know who's watching. But if it is the Yule Man's grinning face pressed up against your window, it may already be too late. Happy holidays. 40 years ago, a US Navy exploratory vessel landed on a chain of islands in the South Atlantic, just 2,000 miles off the coast of Argentina. In other words, the middle of nowhere. Yet on this far-off set of rocks afloat in the middle of the ocean, they discovered a vast array of strange wildlife and plant species that resemble little of what they left behind on the mainland. Could this be a treasure trove of undiscovered species, they wondered? Hoping to capitalize on the discovery, a reconnaissance team of researchers was sent out to explore some of the islands on foot, and what they found did not disappoint. From endangered species of birds to plant life and vegetation that looked like it belonged on Mars, they found a dizzying array of new and exciting examples of evolutionary oddities that would fill a library. But unfortunately, their jubilation was cut short. Attempting to collect soil samples, they dug into the ground and soon discovered that what they were standing on wasn't actually ground at all. The Navy scientists soon discovered the rocky terrain they were exploring was actually made up entirely of organic matter. As per the standard protocol, the SCP Foundation was forced to silence the US Navy research vessel after its discovery. With the okay from the US government, the ship was torpedoed and sunk to the bottom of the ocean with all hands on deck, in the name of protecting the greater good of the masses. A tragedy at sea for the sake of preventing worldwide pandemonium. From there, the Foundation took over with the containment procedures of what would eventually come to be known as SCP-169, better known by its nickname, the Leviathan. The Leviathan is a biblical creature of mythical proportions, said to be able to boil the seas and create earth-ending floods with just a whip of its massive continent-spanning body. It is unclear if SCP-169 has the ability to do these things, though, given its massive size, which Foundation researchers estimate to be somewhere between 2,000 and 8,000 kilometers. It's easy to see how something that big moving at any speed could be devastating for the coastal regions of the world. Although we use the word contain, it is impossible for SCP staff to ever contain something of such massive size. Surveillance and monitoring are about all we can do for now. That and hope it never wakes up and decides that we're on the menu. It was thought to be relatively smooth sailing, until one incident changed everything. Dr. Hart turned off the video monitor and faced the assembled members of MTF Gamma 6, also known as the Deep Feeders, renowned for their specialization in the tracking of deep sea and oceanic anomalies. The room was dark, and each team member was sitting in shadow, but still Dr. Hart could see the seriousness on their faces. "I'm sure you're wondering why I called you here at such short notice," he said. On the screen behind him, he put up a NASA satellite picture of a small set of rocky islands. "You see this little island chain here? Well, it wasn't there a week ago." He paused, rubbing his forehead from lack of sleep. "At 8:05 a.m. today, we recorded another auditory anomaly emitting from SCP-169. This one was much louder and longer than the one recorded in 1997 by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the one known as the Bloop. Back then, it was easy to brush off as some ice breaking off of a continental shelf and scraping against the seafloor. It's not so easy to cover up anymore. These auditory emissions from SCP-169 are beginning to grow more frequent. More than that, increased seismic activity around the archipelago on the creature's back indicates that the rate at which the creature is breathing is also up. Typically, the rate at which the creature takes what we are assuming to be a breath is once every 3 months. The rate has increased to once every 3 weeks. For as long as we've been monitoring SCP-169, it's been adrift along the southern Atlantic, never moving more than a kilometer a week. That behavior is slowly beginning to change. It doesn't sound like much, but something that big even moving just a fraction of that faster means 100-foot tidal waves for the entire South American coastline. We fear the creature is showing signs of waking up. If this is true, it could mean a cataclysm for the hundreds of nations around the world. Millions, hell, even billions could be wiped off the face of the earth if this thing just flips its body too fast in the wrong direction. To put it to scale, this monster is about the size of the Caribbean, maybe even bigger as far as we know. The doctor then pulled out a decanter of whiskey and poured himself a glass, swallowing the entire pour in one go, in an appalling breach of workplace professionalism. Seriously, an XK class end of the world scenario is still no excuse for drinking on the job. We're talking about an extinction level event. A bona fide XK class end of the world scenario. 1,000-foot tsunami waves stretching as far as the eye can see from either end of the horizon. The last time SCP-169 stirred, it created the Mediterranean. In fact, the legends of the biblical flood, Noah's Ark, the same story can be found in every civilization and culture around the world. So maybe they were onto something. It is to this end I call you all here. To save the world from the next great flood. He paused for a moment as the room took in the gravity of the situation.
The more we can learn about SCP-169, the better. And right now, we know squat. For one, we've never seen just how deep the body of the creature goes, or what's under it. The pressure has been too great for our current model submarines, until now. After reinforcing our Nemo-1 deep-sea submersible with thaumaturgical runes, the integrity of its hull has increased exponentially. Your mission will be to travel as far down and as close to the creature as possible. If it breathes, then there must be gills or lungs. There must be some basic biological facts we need to understand if we're going to survive extinction. Our only recourse is to find a way to sedate the creature, and if that doesn't work, then God help us all. Just 12 hours later, deep in the waters of the southern Atlantic, a massive submersible ship was diving down into the depths of the deep ocean, looking for a way to stop the end of the world. Agent JA-6-1, a member of Deep Feeders, looked out of the massive viewing port as the ship slowly descended alongside the rocky trench that made up the body of SCP-169. Behind him was Dr. Hart, sporting a white 5 o'clock shadow and a red nose from a night of drinking to calm his nerves. The entire crew were silent in awe as the giant floodlights of the ship brushed over the barnacle-covered surfaces of the undersea mountain. They progressed slowly, reaching each milestone in depth with caution, knowing that one wrong move could destabilize the pressure in their ship. JA-6-1 murmured the word, "Scales." "What?" asked Dr. Hart. "I've been watching the patterns of the ridges as we sink down. They look like scales. Giant segments. It's hard to see at first because they're so covered in barnacles and sediment, but I'm sure of it. They're giant, armored scales, the way lobsters or crabs have armored exoskeletons." "Interesting," the doctor said, scratching his chin. "Arthropods have segmented armored bodies. This means we might be looking at some sort of evolutionary hybrid, some sort of aquatic mammal such as a whale or dolphin, one that has developed armored segmented scales similar to that of a crustacean." The doctor crossed his arms to think. "The closest thing we have on the fossil record of this magnitude is an armored fish from the Cretaceous period, but even that's way too small to compare to this. This thing has an entire ecosystem on its back." "How old is it?" asked the agent. "Well, now that you mention it, given the impossible age of the creature, an arthropod would make sense. Lobsters and other crustaceans don't age conventionally, you see. They are effectively immortal. In fact, they actually die because they continue to grow until their bodies can't hold up their humongous size anymore. And yet, SCP-169 just kept growing." The doctor trailed off, thinking to himself. Dr. Hart, still lost in thought, turned to walk to the back of the submersible as JA-6-1 followed. He said as much to himself as to the agent, "The creature is old. The geological survey conducted when SCP-169 was first discovered carbon-dated the specimen to over 541 million years old. As you can probably surmise, that's too old for any living being. The results had to be incorrect, and yet I checked them myself more than once. And numbers do not lie. The entity predates our civilization. Hell, it predates complex life forms on this planet as we know it. From an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't make any sense." The agent, confused, asked, "Doctor, how could something so big even come into existence?" "Very little of our planet is actually landmass. It's a wonder we call it Earth. Most of this planet is water. We aren't looking at a creature that's on our planet, Agent. We are on its planet." Just then a flurry of alarms and sensors began to go off at the bridge of the ship. The team scrambled to their stations, checking off monitors and shouting readings to each other. "The ship's thermal sensors are detecting a massive rise in temperature, transmitting power to cooling systems. We have activity northwest of our location. Sonar has something big headed our way. We need to dive now!" The ship lurched forward, nose first, as everyone on board held on to their seats, the restraints keeping them from falling forward. Just outside of the viewing port, Dr. Hart could see an enormous scaled appendage moving fast in their location. "We need to steer the ship clear of the Talons. Revert all power to the thrusters. Get us out of the way!" the doctor yelled. "Don't you think I'm doing that?" the captain shouted back. The ship jolted sideways and downwards as an immense wave of pressure came over the submersible, putting 6 Gs of force on its occupants. JA-6-1 yelped out of fear as the ship came close to crashing into what appeared to be the edge of a titanic talon the size of the Empire State Building. Following the encounter,
The part of the ship bordering the reinforced glass of the viewing port began to glow bright red. "It's boiling the water around us!" one of the crew members cried out. "It's not boiling anything, it's just cavitation due to the pressure reduction in the water. The updated runes on the ship's hull should keep us safe, we just need to cool our heads. Stay focused on the mission, bottom feeders." After several moments of holding their breaths, the crew of Nemo 1 began to relax as their pace returned to a slow descent along the side of the underwater behemoth. Before long, the vessel was no longer traveling straight down, but starting to curve under the creature, traveling north towards the theoretical head of SCP-169. After several hours, the ship came upon giant fissures in the rocky exterior of the creature. These massive vent-like structures appeared stiff, but slowly they opened and closed over the span of weeks. These were the respiratory organs of the organism. Clocking it at over 2 miles underneath the surface of the ocean, the crew carefully began entering the smaller pod-like submersibles that detached from the main ship. Je-6-1 entered his pod and strapped on the haptic gloves that would give him control of the pod's robotic arms. He and a team of 3 other volunteers had agreed to undergo the dangerous mission of attaching artificial chemical emission machines that could be programmed to release anesthetic gas into SCP-169's respiratory system on command remotely. The emission machines could be refueled manually whenever the contents ran out. It was an ingenious solution Dr. Hart came up with when thinking of his time studying sharks as a marine biologist. They would tag the fins of sharks by capturing them and bringing the specimens on the deck of their boat. From there, the scientists would drill a radio frequency emitter onto the fin of the shark. When he had first seen this practice as a young college student, Dr. Hart was afraid the process was harming the shark, but later he learned it was designed in a way to not be harmful to the specimen, and eventually the tag would fall off after enough data on the shark's movement was collected. Except these tags would not be falling off, he thought. They could not. For the sake of all mankind, this had to work. The doctor pressed a button on the receiver of the radio and spoke. Je-6-1, what's your status? Pressure's holding, all signs look good. Je-6-2, pressure's holding, all good. Je-6-3, all clear, Captain. Je-6-4, there was silence. Je-6-4, do you copy? All clear, Doc, sorry, my mic was muted. En route and ready to do this thing. Dr. Hart sighed in relief and slowly reclined in his chair, watching the pods move closer to the large openings on SCP-169's side. One by one, the robotic arms used underwater torches to drill into the thick, rock-like exoskeleton of the creature, screwing in complex million-dollar equipment that was both waterproof and could withstand the immense pressure at such a depth under the ocean. As the minutes turned to hours, Dr. Hart couldn't help but feel anxiety for the safety of his crew and the success of the mission. But before long, the pods began to return one by one to the mothercraft, each completing the segment of work with which they were tasked. The last pod still working was Je-6-1, whose robotic arm was in the process of rotating a large industrial-sized screw. Je-6-1 had all but finished when suddenly a low rumble could be felt shaking the larger submersible. Dr. Hart's voice came crackling over the radio. "Get back to the ship now!" Je-6-1, wrapped in deep focus on his task, replied, "I'm just about finished, just packing up my tool belt." "Leave it. Return to the ship now. That's an order." "Jesus, what's wrong? It's not like this is the end of the world," said the agent, chuckling over his radio. An ear-piercing echo sent shockwaves through the depths of the ocean around the submersible. The waves rumbled with the sound of SCP-169's voice, similar to the sound of a large whale, but amplified by 1,000,000. The sound sent all the crew members falling to the floor as the ship experienced severe damage from the burst of pressure, slightly cracking the glass viewport and sending smoke flooding into the small bridge of the ship. "Gas masks!" shouted Dr. Hart as they all donned breathing apparatus. "SCP-169 is waking up. Begin activation of the chemical emission machines. We need to sedate it now. The Leviathan is waking up. We need to stop it," shouted Dr. Hart. Just then, he looked back and noticed Je-6-1's pod was gone. Je-6-1, what's your position? Je-6-1, where are you? "Sir, sonar has him drifting off deeper into the ocean behind us. He must have gotten knocked off SCP-169 by the shockwave." But Dr. Hart wouldn't have it. He didn't want any more blood on his hands. "Reverse thrusters, turn us around and get to him. We're not losing anyone." "But the breach in the hull!" "It'll hold. That's what the runes are for." The outside of the submersible began to glow a slight blue as the ship's system started to come back online to full capacity, and alarm systems started to turn off and report normal pressure readings. Before long, the Nemo 1 had caught up to JUS 6-1's pod and retrieved the agent, who had been knocked unconscious by the shockwave. Once the agent was back on the main ship, the doctor turned his attention back to the monitors, making sure the installations they drilled into the creature were functional. Slowly, the machines came online to full power, and the speed at which SCP-169 had been moving began to slow ever so slightly. The team all watched the viewport in silence as a steady stream of anesthetic gas was pumped into the respiratory system of the gigantic living myth in front of them. After a few moments of waiting, the doctor spoke. "I think it worked," he said with a smile. The crew erupted in cheers as they radioed control back up on land that the mission had been a success. The message quickly reached the O5 Council, where a red alert status was de-escalated, and the O5 members withdrew from their plan of leaving the current Earth for that of an alternate universe. The whole crew began to sing and celebrate the prevention of the end of the world, as Dr. Hart simply stood in front of the massive viewport, watching the mountainous specimen slowly grow smaller in the distance as the submersible began ascending back to the world above. JUS 6-1 came over to congratulate him, patting him on the back. "We did it," he said. "Loosen up." The doctor managed to laugh along in acknowledgement. "That we did," he said in relief. "That we did." The two watched the deep blue ocean in silence, taking in the vastness of the sea. Perhaps this would not be the end of it, but that day, they had done what the SCP Foundation did best: kick that apocalyptic can a few miles down the road. And sometimes, in the face of the terrifying and the infinite, that's really the best you can do.
Someone was screaming inside the incinerator. The year was 1975. The location was a top-secret refinery and waste disposal plant, one of the many front organizations owned and operated by the SCP Foundation. This sprawling facility, separated into 3 different huge units, each with a specialized task, was located around 75 kilometers outside of Summer Springs, Colorado. It had operated for several decades without incident, but today all hell was about to break loose. Alarms were blaring in Unit C, the area of the facility that dealt with destroying non-anomalous waste via incineration. A traumatized worker had pulled the emergency lever near one of the incinerators in a panic when he'd first heard the loud banging against the interior walls, and then those horrific pained wails. That's when workers of Unit C came to a horrifying realization. The screams weren't just coming from one of the incinerators in Unit C. They were coming from all 6. A chorus of absolute agony echoing up out of the ash pits. This was impossible as far as the Unit C staff were concerned. These incinerators were only to be used for confirmed non-anomalous material. Could some animals or even some poor workers somehow fallen into the incinerators? But even if they had, what were the odds that someone had fallen in all 6 of them at once? It was impossible. The site director was immediately brought in to authorize an investigation, at which point he determined that at least one of the furnaces, in this case furnace number 4, be shut off so researchers and guards could investigate what was going on inside. It seemed like the obvious course of action, but for some of the people on site that day, this would prove to be a fatal mistake. When the fires were put out, something started rattling in the disposal chute. There was a scratching and squealing noise, like something scraping up against the metal. A maintenance worker was ordered to go check inside, and when he opened the hatch, he let out a bone-chilling shriek. There was something, or was it someone, climbing back up the disposal chute. It emerged from the darkness, backlit by the still burning embers of the incinerator, letting out an awful screeching noise that could make even a hardened Mobile Task Force operative shake with fear. The creature was humanoid, a charred, mutilated skeleton reaching out towards the maintenance worker with a bony claw. Before the worker had a chance to stumble back in horror, the beast had clasped him by the throat and started to squeeze. It didn't even need to strangle him. The heat of its skeletal hand burned away the worker's throat in seconds, leaving his limp, wheezing body to drop to the metal grate of the platform below him.
Several armed guards and maintenance workers moved forward to fend off the monster, but just then a volley of more violent shrieks echoed out of the chute behind it. It only took seconds for over a dozen more creatures to crawl out of the disposal chute. They were all like the first, people at various stages of incineration. Some were glowing, charred skeletons with barely any flesh, others looking more like severe burn victims, their faces contoured into scowls of hate and rage. The assembled guards opened fire on the sudden influx of anomalies, emptying the magazines of their submachine guns into their burning bodies, but their weapons didn't seem to cause any lasting damage. The bullets would tear through the flesh of the creatures, causing some of them to stumble and fall, but the wounds would close and the creatures would rise again. It seemed they possessed a deadly combo of extremely high aggression and incredible regenerative abilities. None of the staff present in Unit C were safe as the burning corpses attacked anyone they could find with their bare hands, beating and biting and clawing. Many of them would grapple with Foundation personnel, latching onto them and trying to pull them back down into the incinerator with them. These creatures, that would later be known as SCP-2419-A, caused several fatalities with their surprise attack that day, and the situation was only brought back under control when a mobile task force that possessed more advanced training and weaponry was dispatched to the location. Despite orders from the site director, the MTF found it impossible to actually terminate any of the entities due to their regenerative abilities. Instead, the MTF agents focused on forcing the anomalies back into the chute of Incinerator Number 4 using a powerful industrial steam lance. Once they were back inside, the incinerator's burners were started up once again. The MTFs were also able to capture 5 of the entities and detain them for questioning and experimentation, finally bringing this unexpected containment breach to an end. The Foundation is an organization that prides itself on possessing forbidden and secret knowledge, but even they had no idea what had just happened. There seemed to be no earthly explanation why these creatures would suddenly manifest inside the incinerators. But as the detained anomalies continued regenerating, a slightly clearer picture of what exactly the Foundation was dealing with began to emerge. Every single one of the captured anomalies kept regenerating, and upon getting to the point that they were no longer burn-scarred, the researchers studying the anomalous creatures discovered that each one was identical to a deceased D-class from the Foundation's records. They were physically and genetically identical to the dead Class D personnel, perfect copies, save for the fact that their sole mission in life seemed to now be pure and unmitigated aggression and violence. Researchers wanted to gain greater insight into the minds of these strange creatures through the use of extensive psychological evaluations and interviews. It would turn out to be a very dangerous investigation. A psychological researcher by the name of Dr. Warren conducted an interview with one of the SCP-2419-A instances in hopes of better understanding their mindset. This creature had been heard laughing not long before the interview began, so it wasn't an unreasonable assumption to believe that it could be capable of speech. The interviewee was separated from Dr. Warren by a thick pane of glass to prevent it from indulging in any of its more violent urges. The problem was that Dr. Warren and his assistant researchers had severely underestimated what these creatures were capable of doing to get what they wanted. Dr. Warren tried to begin the interview in good faith. He spoke calmly and politely to the creature through the glass, attempting to remind it of the person it once was. The anomaly didn't appear to be paying attention to the doctor, though, instead focusing on pulling its own arm apart and breaking the bones within. Dr. Warren began to think that the creatures weren't even sentient, if the only activity they seemed to engage in was the wanton destruction of themselves and others. But underestimating them like this proved to be a big mistake. By removing the skin off of its arm and whittling its bone down to sharp edges, the anomaly had transformed its arm into a makeshift knife. Before anyone realized this, it had already used its own jagged bones to break the glass divider and attack Dr. Warren. He perished not long after being stabbed multiple times in his face and eyes, and the anomaly was forcefully taken back to its holding cell. Dr. Daniel Jennings, a senior researcher, was then put on the case. He released a chilling memo of the creatures after his observation period ended. It read, "Before I came here, I worked as a prison shrink. Every person you met had a story bursting with pain and sorrow. Sometimes these stories were about the pain they suffered. Sometimes it was about the pain they inflicted. Some days you felt like everyone there was a beautiful soul torn down by their circumstances. Other days you'd find out what some of them did, and a part of you was glad that they were there to suffer for it. But at the end of every day, I always told myself, they're all humans. They're all people. They all deserve the same dignity, respect, and love as everyone else. No exceptions." Dr. Jennings goes on, "I opened up with that anecdote only so that you could understand that what I'm about to say is not said lightly. These things are not people. They are people-shaped monsters. They are well beyond any definition of psychopathy. Everything they do to hurt, maim, and kill. I would pity them, but that would imply that they're worth pitying. Put them in a hole, then fill that hole with concrete. Better still, throw them back into the incinerator where you found them. I doubt they'll even care." Following this string of unfortunate incidents, containment procedures were put into place to hopefully prevent anything that had happened to the unlucky Foundation staff from happening again. The entire facility was fenced off and was constantly patrolled by MTF Beta 7, also known as the Maz Hatters, a group specializing in containing anomalies which present powerful biological, chemical, or radiological dangers. The furnaces that the anomalous creatures emerge from remain lit at all times, with workers checking and carrying out maintenance on every single one each day of the week. Outside of this, the facility is essentially a no-go zone. Reinforced steel hatches cover the chutes, and they are to forever remain bolted shut. All because of that one terrifying day in 1975. That was the day that the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Facility, which had been a valuable asset to the Foundation for decades, instead became classified as the Euclid-class anomaly, SCP-2419. It is not uncommon for a Foundation asset to one day become a dangerous anomaly requiring containment, but the same question always pops up after. Why? What had a place that had been so valuable to the Foundation suddenly become such an active danger? The answer, as is often the case, is contained within the question. Why would a waste disposal plant be so important to the Foundation in the first place? And more importantly, what else was going on at the plant to make it such an area of active importance for one of the most powerful organizations in the entire world? To put it simply, the plant allowed the Foundation to dispose of something far more important than mere waste material. It gave them what they needed to better erase memories. As you probably already know, the Foundation makes liberal use of amnestics on those exposed to anomalous material to make them forget what they had seen and experienced. But these elusive chemicals, many of which are sourced from SCP-3000, are an inexact science. However, at the Summer Springs Waste Disposal Plant, researchers discovered an immensely valuable alternative. Much of what was disposed of in the incinerators of Unit C were the bodies of dead D-Class personnel. Before being burned, autopsies were performed on the bodies to make sure they were non-anomalous, including the brain. Back in the 1960s, while performing research on the brains of dead D-Classes, they found a method of extracting and distilling the positive memories of the dead, creating a kind of happy soup. When administered into someone who has undergone amnestic treatment, this happy soup creates positive false memories in their mind that fills in those pesky blank spaces that are often behind. This was so useful that happy memories were extracted from the minds of every single D-Class corpse that passed through Unit C, totaling well into the thousands by the time that the first SCP-2419-A instances began to rise. But as all happiness, joy, and love were removed from the minds of the D-Classes, it seemed that all that was left was pure hate, pain, violence, and fury. Feelings too intense and evil to destroy. These were bodies imbued with a malice so powerful that no fire could ever burn them away. They exist now with single-minded determination to get out and destroy everything around them. Everything, including the ones that made them, the SCP Foundation itself. And in the end, it's only a matter of time until they get out. There are thousands of them in there, unable to die, unable to stop. The only thing keeping them in there is the constant burning of the furnaces around them, and those furnaces can't burn forever. The monsters lurking in SCP-2419 will outlive the fire that surrounds them. Because while the furnaces they are contained in are hot, the fires of hate that burn within SCP-2419 entities are even more powerful. And they know this. They know they can't be contained forever, and that someday soon, they'll be able to emerge and exact their terrible revenge. Those who must walk past the incinerators may think they hear their screams echoing out from within, but it's not screaming at all. It's laughter. Disturbing things had been happening on the 5th floor of the Rose Heights apartment building in Albany, New York. Residents had reported strange noises over the last few days. Screaming in the night, pained muttering, soft weeping, scratching and scuttling in the walls. And worst of all, what seemed like an infestation of bugs unlike anything the unfortunate occupants of Rose Heights had ever seen before. They weren't abnormal in size or shape. They looked an awful lot like the common earwig, around 2.5 centimeters long with large curved pinchers on the back. But the color wasn't right. Unlike the usual dark brown, these earwigs were a silvery, almost translucent gray. When people spotted them crawling across their walls or hiding in the carpet, they seemed to shimmer in the light. Eventually, the building's landlady, Donna Tompkins, was called in to do something about the infestation. She spoke to each of the residents about their experience. They reported the strange noises, the mysterious bugs, and even a funny smell they'd sometimes catch in the hall, a smell like someone had thrown up. And every single person that Donna spoke to couldn't help but remark that the smell was particularly strong outside the apartment of a certain resident, Bill Parham. Stranger still was the fact that Bill hadn't been seen in days. Donna knocked on his door, but received no answer. She called him on his cell phone and could hear the phone ringing inside the apartment, but it just went to voicemail. When she checked the security footage of the lobby, she saw that Bill hadn't left the building in the last few days either. Donna called the police, worried that Bill might be sick or even dead inside his apartment. It was strange, given that he was only in his 30s and didn't seem to have any health conditions. But stranger things had happened. Much stranger things were about to happen too. 2 police officers arrived not long after. They called through the door one more time, and when they got no response, Donna gave them the key to head inside. The apartment was a wreck. All the furniture was covered in dust. Filthy dishes were piled high in the sink and on the draining board. The smell of rot was thick in the air. There were empty boxes of painkillers, all the pills popped from their silvery foil laying on the ground. But worst of all were the bugs. The apartment was crawling with them, and they were on every surface. Those silvery gray earwigs. Neither of the officers liked bugs, and it seemed like the deeper they got into the apartment, the more bugs there were. Some even seemed to be crawling towards them, pointing their pinchers at them as though they were defending their territory. This looked to be a textbook case of what happens when a resident keels over and dies. But there was just one problem. Where was the body? Bill Parham had seemingly dropped off the face of the earth, and now a colony of mysterious bugs had started squatting in his apartment in his absence. Then came that smell again, that truly awful smell, like bile and blood. It was even stronger now, and it seemed like it was coming from a nearby closet. The 2 officers, acting on pure instinct, drew their weapons and approached the closet with caution. Even if they weren't consciously aware of it, they knew they were going to find something awful inside. Something evil. Something dangerous. When they threw open the closet door, they couldn't help but scream. They'd found the nest. It was a huge round hive, like the biggest beehive you've ever seen, melded into the lower corner of the closet. The unnatural earwigs were crawling into, out of, and around it. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands of them. And the second they registered the presence of the two officers, intruders into their nest, they began to swarm. In sheer panic, both raised their guns and opened fire into the closet, but it didn't do them any good. Their bullets just pierced and splintered the hive, causing even more enraged insects to spill out and begin crawling over the two cops. They fled from the apartment, screaming in pain from the gnashing pincers of the insects crawling all over their skin. They never did find the corpse of Bill Parham, but that's because Bill Parham wasn't dead, at least not until mere moments ago, when the bullets from the cops' gun had torn through his bones and perforated his organs. He died not long after, and if he could still speak close to the end, he would have thanked them both for the mercy, because the monstrosity that they'd just encountered in the closet wasn't just a nest of mysterious insects in Bill Parham's apartment, it was Bill himself. This is the fate worse than death in store for anyone supremely unlucky enough to fall victim to SCP-439, better known by the nickname for their unique nests, the Bone Hive. And while these nasty little critters may be small, they're filled with enough pure nightmare fuel to send you running into 682's containment chamber for a little comfort. Let's go through this whole nightmarish process and tell you exactly what happened to poor Bill Parham. First discovered by the SCP Foundation in mainland China, SCP-439 specimens largely get by on the fact that they're not much to look at. Unless you're an entomologist, when you see a strange insect, you probably just accept the fact that it's a perfectly normal breed you've just never encountered before. Nobody is hammering down the doors of their local news station to alert the press about the gray earwig they saw crawling out of a crack in their bathroom wall. But if Bill Parham had done just that, it would have saved his life. The Foundation would have immediately flagged the incident as an SCP-439 infestation and dispatched a mobile task force to deal with it. Instead, when Bill saw the earwig for the first time, he was getting ready for work and didn't have the time to stop and deal with it. He made a mental note to buy some bug killer on the way home, but quickly forgot. The insect didn't forget him though. In fact, it thought he would be a perfect candidate for the SCP-439 process. The Foundation has tested extensively with the one SCP-439 sample they'd been able to successfully catch and contain. In all tests, they found that 439 specimens rejected hosts from any species other than humans. They're an extraordinarily specific parasite. It's also only one particular type of SCP-439 specimen that you actually need to worry about: the queens. Despite their superficial similarities, SCP-439 behave nothing like non-anomalous earwigs. Normal earwigs are not social creatures. They're solitary scavengers and they don't keep nests as permanent habitats. The same can definitely not be said for SCP-439. They have complex social structures, much like that of bees, ants, and termites, with queens, scouts, workers, and warriors. If you happen to encounter a worker or a warrior, you may get a painful pinch from their pinchers if you get too close. But if you end up on the wrong side of one of the queens, then you have a much, much worse fate in store for you. And it just so happened that the SCP-439 specimen that appeared in Bill Parham's bathroom that morning was visiting royalty. This 439 queen had selected her target, and now it was time to move to the next part of the process: initial infiltration. When Bill returned home from work, he was delighted to find that the gray earwig was nowhere to be seen, but that didn't mean it was gone. It was still there lurking. It just didn't want to be seen. After all, the real fun would happen after Bill went to bed. Once SCP-439 detects that its potential host has fallen into a deep sleep, it will crawl onto the person's body and into their mouth, which is exactly what it did to Bill. It feels like little more than a tickle in your throat, and you will have no idea that the tiny creature crawling down your windpipe and into the soft, warm tissue of your lungs spells your doom. Very few people wake up during this process, but even if they did, there's virtually nothing they could do. When Bill woke up, he was suffering from mild chest pains and shortness of breath, a symptom not uncommon in a number of respiratory ailments. He had no idea that the SCP-439 queen was already inside him. He got up and went about his day, trying to ignore the pain as it gradually grew worse and worse, feeling almost like something was moving inside his chest. He spent the whole day having to stop to let out a deep, hacking cough, but coughing didn't expel or change anything. He looked and felt so terrible that his boss let him go home early, hoping that Bill would be able to sleep off whatever illness he thought he had picked up. But over the next couple of days, his condition only worsened. The pain grew so excruciating he could barely move, and he was popping painkillers like Tic Tacs to no effect. He started running a dangerously high fever, his body trying in vain to fight back against its lethal intruder. He felt worse than he ever had in his life, but little did poor Bill know, the most terrible parts of the process were yet to come. Through anomalous means, an SCP-439 infection is able to induce fibrodysplasia ossificans progressiva, or FOP, in its victims, which is typically a genetic disease that presents itself before the victim turns 10 years old. The condition is infamous for its primary symptom, turning muscle and other soft tissue into bone, slowly but surely paralyzing the victim and putting them into a state of unspeakable pain. This bone transformation process is known as ossification, and Bill was about to experience it firsthand. His pain increased as his mobility decreased, with more of his flesh becoming solid lumps of bone underneath the skin. Soon enough, all he knew was pain. It had become so agonizing that he was delirious with it. He was drunk on pain. Even perceiving sunlight felt like being stabbed in the eyes. That's why, like all the other victims of SCP-439, he decided to conceal himself in a warm, dark place where no light could get to him. In Bill's case, of course, that place was his closet. He was hurting so bad that all he could do was curl up into the fetal position and weep as his muscles turned to bone and his body began to compact and shrink. He didn't even look like a human anymore. He was more like a ball, covered in a bone shell and filled with warm organs. That's when the queen started laying eggs among his organs. It wasn't long before there was a new brood of around 30,000 specimens living inside Bill's body. He was still very much alive, but there wasn't anything he could do about his situation. His muscles had long since turned to bone, and they had eaten large portions of his brain, leaving mainly the parts needed to keep his organs just barely functioning. After all, the colony still needs central heating. SCP-439 colonies have developed a perfect parasitic relationship with the human body. They even use the stomach inside the hive to pre-digest food into a liquid slurry that's easier for them to consume. The only loser in this situation is someone like Bill, who is forced to become the new home for the world's most nightmarish freeloaders. Eventually, when the colony becomes too big, a queen departs to start a new one, and the process repeats itself once more. It's enough to make you want to sleep with your mouth closed for the rest of your life. Oh, and we haven't even told you the worst part yet. Foundation scientists have conducted tests on some victims of SCP-439 and found that while the creatures do consume large parts of the brain, the parts they leave are capable of consciousness. That's right. Their victims remain aware of what's happening to them the whole time, even when they hardly seem human at all anymore. What actually finally kills the victims of SCP-439 isn't the bodily trauma. It's the starvation that sets in when the colony inevitably moves on. Did we just hear you cough? You might want to go get that checked out. Now go watch SCP-001 When Day Breaks and SCP-823 Carnival of Horrors for more terrifying SCPs that'll chill you to the bone.